$25 shipping and handling. This offer is not sold in store, so call now. Rush delivery available.
You take the moon and you take the sun.
You take everything that seems like
Adventure time! Come on, grab your friends. We'll go to very distant.
are the crystal gems. We'll always save the
Hello everybody, my name is JoyofCrimeArt, and I was a Cartoon Network kid. Of course, it's not to say the Cartoon Network was the only channel I watched growing up, not by a long shot. I watched all the heavy hitters, Nickelodeon, Disney Channel, even some Kids WB and PBS Kids here and there. And while I loved all these channels, when it came down to picking a favorite, well, it wasn't even a contest. It was always Cartoon Network, and it wasn't even close. Even through the channel's ups and downs, there was just something about Cartoon Network that would keep me coming back. And even as I got older, this love for the channel never really went away. Even after I lost cable, I would still keep up with the latest news regarding the channel, even though I couldn't actively watch it. Something that I didn't do nearly as much for the other channels. There was just something special about Cartoon Network, something unique, that made it stand out from its contemporaries. And I don't think I'm alone in thinking this. Whenever you see people online talking about their favorite children's networks, I notice that more often than not, people list Cartoon Network as their favorite, even though, for most of the channel's history, it's been in a distant third place ratings-wise compared to Nickelodeon and Disney Channel. And yet despite that, people seem to have more of an attachment to Cartoon Network. But why is that? Were the shows just that much better, or was there something more to it? What made Cartoon Network so special? This was the question that I was pondering, and so I decided I wanted to find out for myself. This is a channel that's been part of my life for almost as long as I can remember, so I wanted to give it its due. So that's why I decided to do something a little eccentric. I decided that I was going to go over Cartoon Network's history. All of it. From its launch in 1992 all the way to the present day, the shows, the bumpers, the blocks, the people behind the scenes, and anything in between, in order to figure out what made Cartoon Network so special to me and so many others online. But before we get into things, I need to set some ground rules. 1. While I'm going to cover as much as I can, I'm not going to be able to cover everything, obviously. So I'm going to focus on the aspects of Cartoon Network that I feel are the most important or most interesting to me. So I'm sorry if I disappoint all you die-hard Big Bang stands out there. 2. A lot of this video is going to be going off of memory. Yeah, I'm sorry to say, but I did not have the time or resources to rewatch every episode of every Cartoon Network show that I wanted to talk about prior to making this video. So a lot of shows I talk about I haven't seen in a long time, and some I haven't even seen at all. But this video isn't just about me and my opinions. It's also about giving context for these series and their place in the greater Cartoon Network landscape. So in that regard, I don't think that my opinions really matter all that much. Though I will be giving my opinions on shows I have seen or have a strong connection to. 3. I will be focusing exclusively on the American version of Cartoon Network since that's what I grew up with. I know some foreign Cartoon Networks have some wacky stuff on them that are worth talking about, but this video is enough of a production as it is. 4. I'm going to be going over everything in a very rough chronological order, however I may move some things around for the sake of flow. 5. This video is being recorded in late February/early March of 2023, so if something comes up after that, I'm not going to talk about it. And 6. Remember that this is all just my personal opinion, so let's try to not take it too seriously, just have some fun with it, alright? So with all that said, let's dive in and talk about what Cartoon Network means to me. To discuss Cartoon Network, we have to start with its origins, and to do so we have to start with the man behind the channel's inception, Ted Turner, a real-life cartoon character. It was the mid-80s, and around this time this new invention was going around called cable television, as American families went from having 6 channels and nothing to watch to 60 channels with nothing to watch. And while not the first, Ted Turner was a pioneer in this space. You see, with more channels coming out, there was less of a need for a one-size-fit-all mentality to television. You could make channels that targeted specific niches, something that Ted Turner was a pro at. He had massive success with CNN, the first ever American 24-hour news channel, and TNT, which at that time focused mostly on films from the Turner Library. Ted Turner was on the hunt to acquire more films in order to bolster the success of TNT, which led Ted Turner to acquire MGM in 1988. Ted Turner was mainly doing this just to get the film rights, but by buying MGM he also got a little bonus as well, as MGM not just had plenty of classic films in their library, but cartoons as well, and a lot of them at that, from the likes of Popeye and Betty Boop to the entire Looney Tunes back catalog pre-1948. And if Ted Turner had the rights to all these cartoons, he was sure as heck gonna use them, and with this catalog of cartoons he now possessed, he had everything he needed to launch his own Cartoon Network. And then he bought Hanna-Barbera 3 years later in 1991, because it's just something you can do when you're that rich. I mean, this is the same guy who owns millions of acres of empty space in the New Mexico desert. You think Hanna-Barbera's off limits to him? Honestly, while I have no proof of this, I don't think Ted Turner was doing all this just for the money. Just mostly for the money. But Ted Turner is nothing if not a conservationist, be it with film or the environment. I mean, only 2 years after Cartoon Network's launch, he would launch the Turner Classic Movie Channel, a channel dedicated to showing classic films ad-free, basically as a passion project because Ted Turner wanted these old classic films to be seen by a modern audience. And I think the same thought process applies with the creation of Cartoon Network. I think Ted Turner wanted a place for a lot of these old cartoons to be seen by old and new fans alike. I mean, it's not like Ted Turner was a stranger to the world of animation. He is the co-creator of Captain Planet after all.
Protect the environment, or I'll fucking kill you! Captain Planet!
But if Ted Turner was going to beat the already established Nickelodeon and Disney Channel at their own game, he was going to need to establish a team. You had Benny Cohen, the vice president of TNT, who would now act as the first president of Cartoon Network and be in charge of the channel's launch. There was Fred Seiberg, president of Hanna-Barbera Studios, who would play a pivotal role in supplying the channel with new original series, creating a whole new division of Hanna-Barbera known as Cartoon Network Studios, exclusively for this exact purpose. And then there was Mike Lazo, the wild card, a high school dropout who started at the TNT mailroom, who worked his way up to head of programming by pure talent and grit alone. Now obviously the number of people who played a role in Cartoon Network's early success is literally unknowable. It was way more than just these 3 people. But these are the 3 I wanted to highlight. Production of the channel began and a sizzle reel was created to help sell the new network to cable providers. While Nickelodeon prided itself on being the first TV channel just for kids, Cartoon Network prided itself on being the first channel for animation. They even went out of their way to market Cartoon Network as not just a channel for kids, but a channel for adults as well. A place where kids could discover these classic characters for the first time, and a place for adults to relive their nostalgia. Though kids would obviously still be the channel's main target audience.
The cartoon audience is a whopping 44.6% adults. And why not? We grew up on cartoons. These characters are like members of our families.
My public.
Cartoon Network would officially launch on October 1st, 1992 with this big press event with Ted Turner awkwardly surrounded by furries. And with that, Cartoon Network was born. The channel started, like many other cable channels at the time, as just a place to recycle old content. They aired old cartoons for the likes of Looney Tunes, Tom and Jerry, the Flintstones, the Jetsons, Scooby-Doo, Yogi Bear, and many, many, many more. The whole channel had this very retro aesthetic, known officially as the checkerboard era, named after Cartoon Network's iconic black and white checkerboard logo. An interesting look, like sure the logo may be super iconic now, but I wouldn't really consider black and white checkerboard as a design that would really draw kids in. It's like they're going out of their way to tell kids, yeah, we're the channel if you like old crap. So that's what the channel basically was at launch. But I'd be lying if I said there wasn't something kind of nice seeing all these older cartoons being introduced to a new generation, even if a lot of them probably don't hold up the best, especially compared to all the shiny new cartoons that other channels were airing around this time. Still though, they had a pretty impressive library for a newcomer channel, with over 200 cartoon series that they had permanent rights to, resulting in Cartoon Network to adopt their iconic slogan, the best place for cartoons, which seems a little presumptuous right out the gate. We have the Looney Tunes. Does Nickelodeon have the Looney Tunes? Oh wait, Nickelodeon does have the Looney Tunes. But does Nickelodeon have Squiggly Diddly?
I don't fucking think so!
Any new shows would just be compilation series, like Toonheads, which would show old classic cartoons centered around a specific theme while providing trivia and behind-the-scenes information in between the shorts. Or Late Night Black and White, which aired, you guessed it, black and white cartoons late at night. Honestly, these were pretty fun and interesting ways to experience these old shorts. But this couldn't last forever. You can only rerun the same cartoons so many times before people start to get sick of them. Around this time, Nickelodeon and Disney Channel were really starting to ramp up their original productions. Nickelodeon had Ren and Stimpy, Cartoon Network had Adam Ant. Something needed to change. If Cartoon Network would want to be a real competitor to Nickelodeon and Disney Channel, they would need their own original series too. Early on, Turner's main strategy was to release their shows on their more popular channels like TNT for their premieres, and then move reruns over to Cartoon Network, sort of acting as a form of cross-promotion. That's where we got shows like SWAT Cats and Two Stupid Dogs.
The shoe! The shoe!
However, Cartoon Network would eventually premiere their first original series that was exclusive to their channel in the form of the Moxie Pirate Show, aka the Moxie and Flea Show, aka the Moxie Show, which really wasn't even a series, more like a block of cartoons where the CGI host would interact with a live audience in between shorts. But Wikipedia counts it as Cartoon Network's first original series for some reason, so who might argue? The series only lasted 24 episodes, never aired after it completed its run, was never released in any official format, and 22 of the 24 episodes are considered lost media.
Okay, gang, not the strongest first impressions. I could acknowledge that. What else do we got?
I got it. What if we give Base Ghost a talk show? Great idea, gang. Let's give us some raises.
In 1994, Cartoon Network gave us Space Ghost Coast to Coast, arguably the first original show if you don't count everything I listed up until this point as either original or a show. Even then, I think Space Ghost still only barely qualifies. This series, based on the obscure 1960s Hanna-Barbera show, follows superhero Space Ghost alongside his two imprisoned villains, Zorak and Moltar, hosting a talk show and interviewing all sorts of live-action celebrities. The series was created by Cartoon Network head of programming Mike Lazo, and if it wasn't apparent by looking at it, was made up with a very low budget. With most of the animation being reused from the original 1960s show, it really just felt like the show was made so the network could have something original to air. I mean, look at the episode length. Some are 11 minutes long, some are 15, some are 22. But it's not like it mattered. Cartoon Network didn't really have anything else going on. Like, would anyone really care if they had to air one less Looney Tune rerun that day? Space Ghost Coast to Coast is the kind of show that could have only come out at this very specific time under very specific conditions during Cartoon Network's early years. As for the show itself, personally, it's one of my favorite series of all time, no exaggeration. That's right, we're peaking early here, folks. It's not really a show that I think would appeal to a large audience, but I don't think it was really meant to. The show's humor is very dry and awkward, relying a lot on anti-humor. It's an acquired taste, but there's definitely a charm to it. The show is very dialogue heavy, relying a lot on the dynamics between our characters and the guests they interview. But luckily our cast has good enough chemistry for that to be more than enough. Space Ghost works well as the incompetent but well-meaning host with a massive ego. Zorak acts as the evil and incredibly petty foil, always trying to find ways to ruin Space Ghost's show. And Moltar works well as the snarky straight man. But that's not to mention all the memorable side characters, most popular of which being Brack, the childish and dim-witted feline space pirate. But you also had other characters too, Lokar, Tanzit, Space Ghost's evil twin brother Chad. Add a celebrity guest who just seems confused to be there, and it's a perfect recipe for comedy. Sure, the first few seasons are a bit rough around the edges. I think the later seasons kind of lose a bit of that charm as they focus on being random and edgy at the expense of the great character dynamics. To me, season 3 and 4 are the golden years. It contains some of the funniest episodes of any show that I've ever seen. Space Ghost has definitely had a bigger influence on Adult Swim than it did Cartoon Network, which I'll talk about later down the line. But I'd be lying if I said that I didn't think Space Ghost at least helped set the stage for what Cartoon Network programming would be going forward. That sort of more adult humor, dry delivery, and limited animation you get out of a lot of early Cartoon Network series, it all started here. However, while Space Ghost was a great show and did very well, it wasn't really doing anything to put Cartoon Network on the map, so to speak. I mean, it wasn't gonna beat out the Rugrats or anything.
You want me to whack the Rugrats?
To find a show that would be a bigger hit, Fred Cyber created the world premiere Toon, aka the What a Cartoon Show. What's with all these early Cartoon Network shows not being able to pick a dang title? This was a series that would air multiple different animated shorts per episode, the most popular of which would go on to become their own series, the first of which being the network's first big success, that being Dexter's Laboratory. Created by Gendy Tartakovsky, Dexter's Laboratory follows the adventures of a kid scientist named Dexter who is constantly creating wacky inventions in his secret laboratory that he is constantly trying to hide from his parents, all while suffering at the hands of his older sister Dee Dee, who, judging by a design I would guess would be somewhere between the ages of 6 and 17. I actually didn't really watch much of this show as a kid. I saw a few episodes for sure, but it was sort of before my time, so I watched some episodes prior to writing this review in order to get a feel for this show. And honestly, the show is pretty good, though there are definitely some aspects that feel a bit dated. For instance, I feel like if the show came out nowadays, Cartoon Twitter would despise Dee Dee. So many episodes just involve her showing up to make Dexter's life miserable for no reason. Sometimes Dexter does something to deserve it, but most of the time not. The world just hates this kid, you're just supposed to laugh at his misfortune. That said though, whenever Dee Dee isn't just there to make Dexter's life miserable for no reason, I honestly like their dynamic. They feel like genuine siblings. The show also has 2 other cartoon segments, a tradition that started at Hanna-Barbera and just kind of stuck around for a lot of early Cartoon Network shows. For Dexter, you had the Justice Friends, a series of shorts about a bunch of inept superheroes being roommates, and Dial-M for Monkey, about Dexter's pet lab monkey who, unbeknownst to him, fights crime as a superhero. That's right, Dexter does condone animal testing. These segments are okay, and offer some nice variety, but I think I prefer the Dexter segments personally. They just have stronger characters. I will say though that I probably found the show to be more charming than I did funny. That's not to say that I never found the show funny at all, but honestly I feel like the most interesting part of watching the show was just watching it from a historical context. I can definitely see why the show had such a big impact when it first came out. At the time when most of Cartoon Network's other shows were reruns from the 40s through 60s, Dexter felt very modern, or at least modern by 1995 standards, with its more adult humor and pop culture references, but still retaining a lot of that classic feel with its retro 50s aesthetic and UPA-inspired visuals, something a lot of early Cartoon Network shows would go on to have. It made so the show still kind of fit with a lot of the other programming Cartoon Network was airing, despite coming out 20 years later. It's definitely not my favorite Cartoon Network show from this era, and in a lot of ways it does feel like a first series, but there's definitely a charm to it, and I think it was a good stepping stone for the network going forward. Dexter's Laboratory was a big success for the network. It led to the creation of more original series, which Cartoon Network would label as Cartoon Cartoons.
Cartoons!
Likely as a way to compete with Nickelodeon's popular Nicktoons line. And it would be these series that would not only define the network's identity for years to come, but would also lead the rise to the Cartoon Network brand as a whole. They followed Dexter's Laboratory up with Johnny Bravo, a series following the adventures of a muscle-bound, womanizing man-child named Johnny Bravo going around trying to hook up with women and failing in spectacular ways. Because that's what every child can relate to, a guy wanting to get laid. Oh my god, he's such an alpha. This show is honestly really funny. A lot of the comedy just comes from Johnny himself. He's such an amusing character, being so stupid and full of himself without even realizing it. They say a good character can work in any scenario you put them in, and that's the case here. Some people may find the series to be a bit problematic due to how much of a womanizer and borderline sexist Johnny can be at times, but he's not that bad.
Hi, Johnny. This is little Susie from next door. Will you come to my birthday party today?
I am busy. Call me in 15 years when you're a co-ed.
Johnny, you can't say that. That's why your show isn't available to watch on Max. Okay, I admit that a lot of these jokes in the series have not aged the best. This is definitely an example of a show you could not make today, but it really isn't as bad as it looks. Johnny is made to be the butt of the joke, and always gets comeuppance for his actions, and even that his actions never come across as malicious, which I think definitely helps in keeping him likable. He doesn't mean to be a misogynistic jerk, he's just ignorant. Like, he generally thinks acting all macho is what women want, and is too dumb to realize otherwise. It's like Pepe Le Pew from Looney Tunes. Okay, bad example. The series also has these segments that involve Johnny teaming up with various celebrities, a homage to the old Scooby-Doo movies Hanna-Barbera used to produce. Like, believe me, the show can get weird at points, but I mean that in the best way. Speaking of weird, Cow and Chicken was also a show that certainly existed. Cow and Chicken, the only Cartoon Network show to promote bestiality, and before you say, oh, there was no bestiality, the two humans just happened to give birth to farm animals, somehow, I would like to point you to Cow and Chicken's grandparents. Cow and Chicken follow the titular siblings, the girly but loud cow and the cynical chicken, as they go through various misadventures, and also, the devil is there. Oh, I'm sorry, I mean the red guy. The show definitely has a bit of a different vibe to it than a lot of other Cartoon Network's originals at the time. While shows like Dexter and Johnny Bravo felt very dialogue-based and inspired by the likes of early Hanna-Barbera and cartoons from UPA, Cow and Chicken, to me at least, always felt a bit like Cartoon Network's answer to Nickelodeon's Ren and Stimpy. Not to the point of being a straight-up ripoff, but the show definitely seemed a lot louder and grosser and more hectic than a lot of the other series that Cartoon Network was putting out at the time. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. Variety can be a good thing after all. Though I do see people talk about Cow and Chicken a fair bit less than some other series from Cartoon Network's classic era. However, the show was still fairly successful, even getting a spin-off, I Am Weasel, following the lives of I Am Weasel, who succeeds in anything he attempts, and IR Baboon, an idiotic and envious ape who's constantly trying to get one up on Weasel. Two series didn't really have much to do with each other, as I Am Weasel started as a segment on Cow and Chicken, kinda like Justice Friends or Dial Web for Monkey with Dexter. The only through line being the red guy who was in both series. While all these shows were considered hits, however, they would pale in comparison to what would come next. The Powerpuff Girls, created by ex-Dexter's Lab storyboard artist Craig McCracken, followed the adventures of three superpowered little girls, Blossom, Bubbles, and Buttercup, who used their power to protect the city of Townsville from the forces of evil. It was such a simple premise, but it worked so effectively. It really feels like there was something for everyone. There was comedy, action, great characters for the girls themselves, the supporting cast, and the villainous rogues gallery that are so iconic they could give Batman a run for his money. The show was cutesy, but it could also be badass. It was funny, but it was also weirdly dark at times. It was a juxtaposition between these adorable children and the immense power that they possessed that made the series work. And I think all these factors really helped with its appeal, as the series quickly became one of the most popular shows on the network by a far margin, accumulating a variety of merch and even being the only Cartoon Network original series to get a theatrical movie, which told us the girl's origins. Unfortunately, the film bombed at the box office for a variety of reasons, but just the fact that the series was able to get one in the first place is impressive enough. The series wasn't perfect, and some parts don't age the greatest. Like, I know this is gonna sound really weird, but with so much talk about police brutality in the news over the last couple of years, it kind of makes all the scenes of the girls just decimating these villains a bit awkward.
You want some more, man? Could you? No. Yeah?
But that doesn't take away from the fact that this is just an overall solid series. Looking back, it might have been one of the first non-preschool series I remember really getting into as a kid, as well as the first Cartoon Network series I really got into in general. And at the time, it was definitely my favorite show on the network. That said, however, while this was my favorite as a kid, it's not my favorite cartoon nowadays. No, that would be Ed, Edd and Eddy. Created by Canadian animator Danny Antonucci.
Fuck America.
Ed, Edd and Eddy followed the titular Eds, 3 preteen boys who would go around the cul-de-sac coming up with a variety of schemes in order to scam the neighborhood kids out of their hard-earned money in order to buy some jawbreakers. We have Eddy, the de facto leader, an egotistical, greedy loudmouth who always comes up with the plan. There's Double D, the logical voice of reason and moral center of the trio, and then there's Ed, the dumb and childish muscle of the group. One thing you can do to make me love a show is to get a bunch of characters with strong and varied personality types and put them together and see how they bounce off each other. It's what I love about Space Ghost and Powerpuff Girls, and it works just as well here. There are times in the series where the episodes just completely derail in the bickering between the characters, and I don't mind it. That's not getting in all the side characters who are extremely memorable in their own right. One thing that Ed, Edd and Eddy is able to do is I was able to take a lot of tropes I normally don't like, but somehow I was able to turn it around and make it work. Like, I'm not normally that big of a fan of slapstick and mean-spirited humor, but with this show, I don't know, they just make it work for me. I also like the way the show looks. It's freaking hideous. I love it. The whole series was done in squiggle vision, where the characters' outlines move even when the characters are standing still. Other shows have used this technique, but Ed, Edd and Eddy is probably the most famous. The series just manages to feel so unique. Like, I really can't think of much I can compare the series to. There is really no other series like it. The series clearly resonated with a lot of people, as it is still, to this day, the longest running Cartoon Network original, lasting for over 10 years, even though a lot of that time was spent on hiatus. We also had Courage the Cowardly Dog, created by John Dilworth. The series stars a cowardly dog named Courage who has to protect his owners, the kind and loving Muriel and the grumpy and abusive Eustace, from all kinds of paranormal threats in nowhere, Kansas. The show is infamous for being a source of nightmare fuel for 90s kids, and while it's obviously still a kid's show, it can get pretty creepy at times, and I think it's honestly a good thing. Some kids like to be scared, and having a show like this that's scary but not too traumatizing definitely helps add some variety in Cartoon Network's lineup at the time. But it wasn't all scares, the show known when to be goofy too, relying mostly on visual humor and slapstick. It's definitely one of the most artistic series CN had at the time. Some of these monsters can be pretty high concept, and I think the way the show incorporates different animation styles helps give the show an uneasy creepiness, making things just feel slightly off. The show is often seen as one of Cartoon Network's best, and I can see why, and I appreciate Cartoon Network trying something a bit different. Speaking of different things, we also got Samurai Jack, which was way off course for the type of things Cartoon Network would typically make. The series was created by Gendy Tartakovsky, the creator of Dexter, but the series was a far cry from Dexter. Samurai Jack followed the titular samurai who, in a quest to destroy the all-powerful demon lord Aku, gets flung into the future where Aku's evil is law. Now he has to find a way to travel back to the past in order to undo the post-apocalyptic world that Aku has created. Talk about a unique premise, basically allowing the series to tackle any genre, and trust me, they take advantage of it. You got action, fantasy, sci-fi, horror, comedy, film noir, and everything in between. The series is very atmospheric, often being done with very little dialogue, sometimes even no dialogue at all. It just felt more adult than most other Cartoon Network originals, but could still be enjoyed by a kid. Jack is a very likable character, being badass and stoic, but also kind and willing to sacrifice his own quest in order to get home if it means helping others. Even if he goes back in time and the people wouldn't be in danger in the first place, I admit there's a bit of a plot hole that affects, I'd say, about 80% of the episodes. Aku, meanwhile, is a fun villain, managing to be both hammy while also feeling like a genuine threat. While shows like Powerpuff Girls and Dexter could have some elements of action to them, this was really Cartoon Network's first show where action was the focus, and it delivers. They had to make all the bad guys Jack fights robots or aliens in order to make the show age appropriate for kids, but that just leads to more creative enemies, so I don't mind. Show isn't perfect, sometimes the slow pacing can be a bit too slow. Some episodes are basically just 22-minute long fight scenes which can kind of drag, and sometimes Jack can feel a bit too invincible. But beyond that, Samurai Jack was and still is a great show for kids and adults alike. So good in fact that after it ended up being revived on Adult Swim to somewhat mixed results, but hey, at least it got a proper ending. These shows would lead Cartoon Network to massive success. While some were more popular than others, they were all at least pretty successful, and seen as at least good by the general public. So good in fact that Cartoon Network had an entire programming block dedicated to them, known as Cartoon Fridays. In most cases, Friday night is a death slot for TV, since most people are out doing things. But for kids, it was the perfect way to kick off the weekend and helped fodder many a sleepover for thousands of children. The block would air episodes of the cartoons back to back with bumpers in between hosted by different Cartoon Network characters. This was really cool to see, and something that I wish we got more of nowadays. It was nice seeing all these characters who would normally have no reason to be together interact and play off each other. It kind of made these characters feel more real in a sense, like they had lives outside of these cartoons. I mean, it feels like nowadays networks are all about having crossovers between all their various IPs, and it feels like this was sort of the inception of that. Things would change for Cartoon Network, however, as their parent company Turner was merged with Time Warner, meaning that Cartoon Network was now owned by Warner Brothers. This was a double-edged sword, as now that meant that the ownership of Hanna-Barbera was now under Warner Brothers, shows made by the Cartoon Network Studios division excluded. As such, Cartoon Network Studios was spun off into its own studio, and Cartoon Network, the channel, now had to pay money if they wanted to air any old Hanna-Barbera or MGM programming. A lot of older shows still stuck around, and they began to have less and less of a presence on the network, in favor of newer shows that Cartoon Network outright owned. However, there was a plus side to this deal. That being that Cartoon Network gained access to the shows from the Warner Brothers library. Batman the Animated Series, Superman the Animated Series, Animaniacs, Tiny Toons, and many more. Sure, these shows still premiered on other channels first, but they still played a big role in Cartoon Network's history. It shows that Cartoon Network wasn't just content in making some of the greatest cartoons ever made, but went out of their way to acquire them as well. With this shift in content, the network had a bit of a rebrand to reflect the network's new direction. Out was the checkerboard era and came in the Starburst era, featuring these characters in these white voids. This didn't last very long, which is why not long after we got another rebrand known as the Powerhouse era, which was much more successful. While the general vibe of Cartoon Network during the checkerboard era felt very retro, the Powerhouse era felt much more in line with what channels like Nickelodeon were doing, with commercials that were bouncy and energetic. Ads were placed on these fairly generic colored backgrounds, but I do like how the colors subtly indicate the time of day the shows were on. Yellow for the mornings, green for the afternoons, blue for evening, dark blue for late at night, and purple for action shows. During this era, we also got these really ambitious promos, which much like the Cartoon Friday bumpers, would feature various Cartoon Network characters all coexisting together in a live-action office building, Roger Rabbit style. Literally a network run by cartoons. These were awesome. It was always cool seeing these characters just interact and do their thing. And while promos like these had existed since the channel's inception, they really started to grow in prominence during this era. We also had Groovies, these animated music videos that would air between programs, with songs based around different Cartoon Network shows, performed by a variety of indie bands. These were super cool, with most of the songs being real earworms. Some even took on different art styles, with some just recycled footage pretty poorly, like yikes. But still, these were awesome. It's something that Cartoon Network didn't have to do, but really helped in making the channel feel more alive. Cartoon Fridays wasn't the only programming block the channel had, however. There was also Cartoon Theater, a block dedicated to airing animated movies. I like how dramatic the announcer is. Like, you weren't watching Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island. You were watching an event.
In the world television premiere, it's Scooby-Doo and the gang in a brand new movie adventure.
And I would be remiss if I didn't talk about Toonami. While Cartoon Fridays was Cartoon Network's main block for comedy and Samurai Jack, Toonami was Cartoon Network's block for action-adventure programming. The brainchild of Jason DeMarco and Sean Atkins. The block was hosted by an admittedly very outdated CGI model of Moltar from Space Ghost Coast to Coast, until eventually being switched to a robot named Tom, voiced by Sonny Strait. The block would air on weekday afternoons and specialized in not just action-adventure cartoons, but Japanese anime as well. The first show that aired on the block was Thundercats, a co-production between American and Japanese studio. And I think this was the perfect starting point for what the block would be going forward. A mixture of action shows, both East and West. They would air Western cartoons like The Real Adventures of Giant Quest, a reboot, and the Fleischer Superman shorts, as well as Japanese anime like Voltron and Ronin Warriors. The block did well. However, the block would eventually hit it big with the acquisition of two shows in particular, Sailor Moon and Dragon Ball Z. Let's start with Sailor Moon since it aired first. Sailor Moon follows a young 14-year-old Japanese high school girl named Usagi, or Serena in the English dub, who after befriending a magical talking cat named Luna gains the power to transform into the magical warrior Sailor Moon. Now she, alongside a team of other Sailor Scouts, have to fight all sorts of various monsters and villains to protect the universe from evil. I admit, I have not seen the show at all, so I can't judge it on its quality, but I am aware of its impact. I mean, it's one of the go-to shows people in the US think of when they hear the word anime, as well as the series that popularized the magical girl genre as a whole. You don't typically get that many action cartoons with a predominantly female cast, especially in America during the 90s. And this show wasn't just girly, it was unapologetically girly. But I think that kind of helped the show stand out, showing that just because you were girly didn't mean you couldn't also kick butt. And because of this, I think the show was able to appeal to a large demographic of people who may not have watched Toonami otherwise. And then we have Dragon Ball Z, a shonen series following the adventures of an alien martial arts master named Son Goku who has to protect the world from a variety of foes, from villainous aliens, psychotic androids, mythical demons, and everything in between. So there's actually a sequel to another series, just called Dragon Ball, so we got the sequel first, which is kind of weird when you think about it. I mean, the first couple episodes of the series consists of our main character, Goku, who keep in mind any kid watching the series for the first time would have no emotional attachment to, finding out that he's an alien, realizing that he has a long-lost evil brother, teaming up with his arch-enemy Piccolo, who any kid watching the series for the first time would also have no emotional attachment to, and then dying. That's just the first 4 episodes. Not that it matters, because death can be easily undone using the magic of the Dragon Balls, 7 magical artifacts that, when collected, can grant any wish. Still though, even though death in Dragon Ball Z is typically more of an inconvenience than anything else, it was still weird seeing a show airing in the middle of the afternoon on Cartoon Network incorporate this level of violence, even if it was censored. Japan and the United States have different rules for what's allowed on kids programming, and Dragon Ball Z was always aimed at older kids and teens anyway, so when brought over to a channel like Cartoon Network, it seemed a bit out of place. But I think that's what made the show so appealing. Kids love watching things that make them feel grown up. But the show was still lighthearted and whimsical enough that it could appeal to anybody. The show's sense of scale also did a lot to help, I think. Dragon Ball Z is one of the most needlessly extra shows ever made, and that's why I love it. It's a type of show where even the weaker bad guys are still able to blow up planets if they wanted to, and I think in the 90s, American viewers just didn't get stuff like that. And the show blew up as a result, becoming one of the most popular shows not just on Toonami, but on the channel as a whole. It was a phenomenon. And with the success of these shows, Toonami was able to acquire even more anime, like Gundam Wing, Big O, Outlaw Star, Tenchi Muyo, Yu Hakusho, Rurouni Kenshin, Card Capture Sakura. The original Dragon Ball series eventually got to air. Hamtaro? He's a small hamster with big adventures.
Toonami presents the story of a rodent with mad skills.
I've got things to take care of.
But it wasn't just the shows that kept people coming back to Toonami. People grew an attachment to the block itself. The block was a master of vibe, with its drum and bass background music and ambient space aesthetic. That's not even getting into the host, Tom, who often felt like a cool older brother type of figure. He would talk to the audience between shows, sometimes reviewing popular video games at the time, showing off fan art, or just giving genuine life advice. I think that was a lot of the appeal of Toonami. It never felt like it was talking down to the audience. The block would grow and evolve as time went on. They would have these week-long events every few years where they would get to see Tom go on his own adventures during the commercial breaks, usually resulting in some sort of shakeup for the block itself. This led to the inclusion of Sarah, a female robotic AI who acted as a partner/foil for Tom, and the upgrade from Tom 1 to Tom 2, with Steve Bloom replacing Sonny Strait as the voice of Tom. Sonny Strait's a great actor, but this is easily the more iconic Tom voice. It just fits the character more.
So it's a brand new Toonami, but the mission objectives remain the same. My name is Tom. I'm the new Moltar.
And looking around, I see a lot of new faces trying to break into the action cartoon biz. I guess that makes us OGs.
Toonami really blew up in popularity, eventually getting a second time slot called the Midnight Run, which at its peak would air from 12 AM to 6 AM. That, in addition to the 2 to 3 hours Toonami got in the afternoon, was a testament to Cartoon Network's faith in the block. During the Midnight Run, Toonami was able to air shows with slightly less censorship. I mean, to be fair, it made sense. Toonami did appeal a bit to an older demographic. It's not like Cartoon Network was really doing anything else that late at night when their target audience was asleep anyway. They also had other special events, like a special presentation of the Midnight Run that aired exclusively animated music videos, Giant Robot Week, which aired stuff like Neon Genesis Evangelion at 4:30 in the afternoon. Heavily censored, but still. What the heck, Toonami? Who thought that was a good idea? And Toonami Full Cycle, which was 24 hours of non-stop Toonami. I don't think Toonami gets as much credit as it deserves. Like, people still remember it fondly, but it played a big part in introducing anime to a new audience here in the West. I don't think it's the reason the anime boom happened. I feel like after Pokemon and Power Rangers made it big and the anime boom was kind of inevitable, and someone somewhere would have made some kind of Toonami-esque block eventually. But would it have been as good? Would they have taken a risk to air a lot of these more violent and mature titles? I'm not so sure. And on Saturday night, Cartoon Network had Saturday Video Entertainment System, which was like Toonami, but wasn't. Yeah, this was a weird one. It was a block that aired action shows on Saturday night, but wasn't Toonami for some reason. It still aired most of the same shows Toonami aired, but they did have a few exclusives like Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! Or as I called them at the time, My Personality. They also had different bumpers featuring this green Samus Aran clone. A lot of people dislike this block for just being Toonami light, which I totally get. But I don't know, I always kind of liked the vibe of these bumpers. They were kind of cool. Cartoon Network was at the top of their game. Though as the channel entered the early 2000s, things began to change. While in the 90s it seemed like pretty much every original show the channel pumped out was at least a modest success, in the 2000s the channel would release several shows in a row that would all flop, only getting 1 or 2 seasons. Mike-Lou and Og, Sheep in the Big City, Time Squad, Whatever Happened to Robot Jones, Evil Con Carne. But the thing is, generally speaking, all these series are shows that people look back upon fondly, being seen nowadays as cult classics. But for whatever reason, they just weren't able to grab an audience, or at least not as much of an audience as their earlier shows did. But things would change even more when Betty Cohen, the president of Cartoon Network, stepped down from her position. Not for any bad reason, it seemingly just had to do with creative differences with the higher-ups on the direction Cartoon Network should be heading. She was replaced with Jim Samples, senior vice president of TNT at the time. You'll see this more the further the video we get, but typically whenever Cartoon Network gets a new president, the channel experiences some form of radical change, as they have their own vision for how the channel should be run. This is true of all TV channels, but when a channel as creative and experimental as Cartoon Network, the changes were a lot more drastic. It was the beginning of a new era for the network. So how well did Jim Samples do? One of the first big changes was with Cartoon Network's late night programming. While Cartoon Network always targeted both a kid and adult audience, it was pretty obvious that their main audience were the kids. They didn't typically watch TV late into the night, so if kids weren't watching late at night, why not try to appeal more to adults? They had some success with the Midnight Run, which aired slightly more mature programming, but that just felt like Cartoon Network dipping their toes into the adult market. So what would happen if they just dived right in? On December 30th, 2000 at 4 in the morning, a series of weird shorts aired on the channel unadvertised. These were pilots for an upcoming adult-only animation block that would eventually launch in the following year, known as Adult Swim.
All kids out of the pool for Adult Swim. All kids out!
A 2-hour programming block that would air every Thursday and Sunday night from 10 to 1 a.m., eventually expanding to every day of the week, all night long. Mike Lazo was put in charge of running the block, with his own series, Space Ghost Coast to Coast, leaving Cartoon Network to be part of it, alongside new programming like Aqua Teen Hunger Force, C-Lab 2021, a Space Ghost spin-off titled The Brack Show, alongside some acquired programming like UPN's home movies and the anime series Cowboy Bebop. Adult Swim is this whole own can of worms that probably warrants its own separate video, so I'm not going to talk about it much here. But Adult Swim always felt like Cartoon Network's rowdy older brother in a way. I always felt like Adult Swim and Cartoon Network shared a lot of the same DNA, with both having the same level of experimentation and use of quality licensed programming. The only difference being that Adult Swim was targeted at a more mature audience. Even a lot of Adult Swim's early programming were based on or inspired by early Hanna-Barbera properties before the block began branching out to its own thing, just like Cartoon Network. Of course, as a kid I didn't like it, because I just wanted to watch more Cartoon Network. But as an adult, I can say that I can appreciate the block a lot more for what it is. And I feel like if you liked Cartoon Network, then there was a good chance you would probably like Adult Swim as well, assuming you were old enough to watch, of course. But back on the Cartoon Network front, many of the shows from the early years were starting to either come to an end or were starting to show their age a bit. Shows like Cow and Chicken and I Am Weasel had ended, shows like Courage, The Cowardly Dog, and Samurai Jack were on their way out. Dexter's Lab and Powerpuff Girls were still running, but without the original creators who had moved on to other projects, resulting in a drop in quality to many fans. Johnny Bravo had a similar fate, though the creator was only absent for the 3rd season and came back for the 4th for some reason. The only classic show that was still really going strong was Ed, Edd n Eddy, and with so many newer shows failing to reach a wide audience, it felt like Network was a bit overdue for a shakeup. And with this shakeup came a whole new look. It was out with the Powerhouse era and in with CN City. CN City was a major overhaul for the channel in terms of appearance and presentation, complete with a brand new logo. taking the classic checkerboard design and abbreviating it to a simple C and N, while also tilting it to make it look quirky. I honestly don't mind this design. The classic Carteric banner is always going to be iconic, but its retro-inspired design was starting to feel a bit outdated now the channel was having newer shows that were starting to have less of a Hanna-Barbera/UPA influence. Plus, it could be a bit hard to make the logo out due to how small the text would appear when shrunk down to the tiny corner at the bottom of the screen. This logo felt more modern without straying too far away from CN's brand. I think the logo does a good job of reflecting what Carteric was trying to go for at this point in its history. Similar to the Powerhouse era, the CN City era would feature these bumpers of the Cartoon Network characters interacting with each other. Only instead of taking place in a live-action office building, it was an entire CGI city. This felt like a natural extension of what the Powerhouse era was doing. The fun of the Powerhouse era bumpers was seeing how the characters all interacted, but they were still limited to the office for the most part. But with the CN City bumpers, we got to see them go about their day, living their actual lives. Instead of it just being an office, now they had a whole city to explore with locations lifted directly from the characters' respective shows. These backdrops honestly look really impressive, especially considering the time period they were made. Even now I think they look pretty nice. While the checkerboard era was charmingly retro, the Powerhouse era went out of its way to be bombastic and wacky. The CN City era had this level of chillness to it. It was a lot more subdued. I was having a bit of a lo-fi feel. CN City also had more of a sense of cohesion, with the Up Next promos being modeled after street signs over the city backdrop. As much as I liked the Powerhouse era, there wasn't really much of a connection between the characters working in office and blue background. It would even change things throughout the year, with CN City going through summer, Halloween, Christmas, all in real time. Sure, the Powerhouse era did this too, but not to the same extent. Though I'd be lying if I said the CN City did feel a bit empty at times. Compared to the Powerhouse era, it felt like practically every frame was filled with characters just standing in the background. This was likely due to the fact that this was around the time where Carteric was fully moving away from the old Hanna-Barbera programming entirely, with most of these old classic series being removed entirely by 2004, with Looney Tunes and Tom and Jerry being the only series to really stick around, while the other shows were moved to a new channel, Boomerang, a 24-hour commercial-free channel dedicated solely to the preservation of classic cartoons. I can't believe CN City gentrified by Cartoon Network. It was a bit of a shame losing a lot of these classic series. I mean, Cartoon's original purpose was being a place for all these old classic series to find a new audience, while also being able to be watched by older fans. So it did feel like Cartoon Network was losing a part of its core identity. At the same time, there were only 24 hours a day, less now that you had to factor in Adult Swim. As Cartoon Network made more and more new shows, it got new shows from other sources, something had to give. But I think they handled it as tactfully as they could. I mean, you have one bullet, you have to choose between Edda and Eddie and Yankee Doodle. Who are you shooting?
What are you gonna do with that rifle?
The CN City era of bumpers was top-notch, though I may be a bit biased as this was the era I have the strongest memories of when I was a kid. But I think they did a good job showing that Cartoon Network was heading in a new, more modern direction. Though not being too different from what came before and still remembering its roots. But aesthetics are one thing, how was the actual programming? In addition to reruns of still running and recently ended classic series from the Cartoon era, they began to embrace some newer shows, what I sort of consider to be the second generation of Cartoon Network originals. We had the grim adventures of Billy and Mandy following the exploits of two children, the idiotic Billy and the cynical Mandy, as they win a deal with the Grim Reaper, making it so he has to be the two's best friends forever. Okay, maybe friend is the wrong word, slave, he's their slave. This is a Cartoon Network show about slavery. Billy and Mandy started as part of a compilation series, Grim and Evil, where it was paired with Evil Cunt Cardi, but the two shows would eventually split off, similar to Cow and Chicken and I Am Weasel, with Evil Cunt Cardi not lasting very long, while Billy and Mandy went on to be a hit. Definitely a show that changed a lot over time, with early episodes possessing a darker atmosphere, contrasting the more comedic elements. Sort of like a tamer Courage the Cowardly Dog, but the show went on just became progressively dumber and dumber, and focused more on being a straight comedy. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but there is definitely a difference between the show's earlier and later seasons. The show relied a lot on dark and gross out humor, things I've never really cared for. I'd be lying if I said the show couldn't be funny with just how random and out there it can be at times. The show also had some really creative stories, often being inspired by classical mythology and folklore or horror pop culture. I also really like most of the characters. I admit I always found Billy and Mandy to be kind of whatever characters, not awful but just sort of one note, but I like the show's supporting cast a lot. I like Grim, Billy's best friend Erwin, the monster hunter Hostel Gato, the goss of chaos Eris, Dracula, the idiotic demon Fredburger, works in small doses. Honestly, looking back, the show was a pretty memorable cast of side characters, to a point where the creator of the show, Maxwell Adams, actually tried pitching a spin-off starring a lot of the side characters after the series wrapped production, titled Underfist. However, this spin-off would never see the light of day outside of its initial pilot movie. The series also looks good, even if the art style between the first and last seasons look absolutely nothing alike. But later episodes even start incorporating some shading, which is rare for television shows. Billy Mania was a pretty stupid and immature show, with Senior Vice President of Cartoon Network at the time, Michael Oleeds, even going as far as saying that the show was a, quote, hateful fart cartoon that was hurting Cartoon Network's brand. But I like the show. Sure, it can be a bit too mean and immature for my liking at times, but the jokes land, they really land. I guess you could say I consider it somewhat of a guilty pleasure. We also got Codename Kids Next Door, following the adventures of 5 child operatives, number 1 through 5, working for the secret organization known as the Kids Next Door, who travel around the world fighting adult tyranny, things like homework, bedtimes, not being allowed to drink soda, stuff like that. What I really enjoy about the show is the way he's able to tackle situations all kids grew up with and escalate them to the nth degree. The show is extremely imaginative and immediately relatable for any kid.
The show had several memorable villains, from the delightful children from down the lane,
Father, Count Spankulot. Who can forget Count Spankulot? He spanks children, that's his gimmick. Okay, Carteric, you refuse to acknowledge Johnny Bravo, but this is seen as acceptable to you? The show even had some continuity and story arcs that developed as the series went on, which is something you see a lot now, but in the early 2000s when the show came out, it was pretty uncommon for a primarily comedy-focused series. Even if it was abundantly clear that everything was made up as they went along, it didn't always get resolutions to arcs that made a lot of sense, but it could also be argued that this somewhat nonsensical sense of storytelling fits the show's childlike tone, almost like the plot itself was written by a child, where it kinda makes sense, but kinda doesn't. The show isn't perfect. Codename Kids Next Door is a very loud show. Everyone is pretty much always yelling. And I hope you like the shaky Kim effect because the animators love to use it, often several times an episode. But those flaws can be overlooked. This is a really great show that carries that chaotic energy that'll make you feel like a kid no matter how old you are while watching it. Both Billy Mania and Kids Next Door were the last Cartoon Network shows to have the cartoon branding. Although they technically premiered during the Powerhouse era, I always associated them more with CN City, because that was the era where most of their episodes aired. The two shows even had this crossover episode, which is really fun to see. Even if the two shows' art style and sense of comedy didn't really match at all, but still, it was neat. We also got Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, created by Craig McCracken, the creator of the Powerpuff Girls. The series, set in a world where children can literally manifest imaginary friends from nothing, follows an 8-year-old boy named Mac, whose mother forced him to get rid of his imaginary friend Blue after deeming he's too old for him. Because in this world, these fully sapient creatures just have less rights than household pets, I guess. Max ends up dropping Blue off at Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, a foster home where imaginary friends live hoping to one day become adopted by another kid. Though after making a deal with the house's founder, Madame Foster, Mac is permitted to keep Blue there free from threat of being adopted by another kid as long as he agrees to visit every day. It's definitely interesting to see this show, as it is very different from Powerpuff Girls, being a pure slice of life, having half-hour-long episodes, and a completely different art style to boot, featuring no outlines and being animated in Flash, a first for a Cartoon Network original. The Flash honestly holds up really well given when the series came out, likely due to how stylized it is. The show also has a really fun cast of side characters, from the cowardly Eduardo to the too kind for his own goodwill to the hyperactive and sassy Coco. It's honestly a pretty nice laid-back show. However, I will say that one of the biggest drawbacks of the show will have to be the main character's dynamic. Mac is alright, even if he's a tad generic. Blue, however, well,
he's an asshole.
He's just a jerk. If it reaches a point in some episodes, I do want to specify only some episodes, where he stops being annoying to the character and starts being annoying to the audience as well. Like, I do not buy Mac and Blue's friendship. Like, seriously, Mac, you're really jumping through all these hoops just to keep being friends with this guy? Because let me tell you, he ain't worth it. Foster's is a good show, but I think compared to Powerpuff Girls that came before, I definitely prefer that show more. These shows were definitely the big three heavy hitters during the Jim Samples era. And unlike the Betty Cohen era where Powerpuff Girls was clearly the most popular show, with Ed, Ed and Eddie being in second, I feel like all three of these shows were about equal to each other. However, while these shows may have been the big three Cartoon Network shows at the time, it did mean the channel did have other shows covering both action and comedy. Starting on the action front, they got a big tie-in with Star Wars Clone Wars, not to be confused with Star Wars The Clone Wars, which would air later. This was an animated miniseries meant to bridge the gap between Star Wars Episode 2 and 3, created by— you just keep showing up, don't you? Though honestly, Gendy was a perfect pick for this project. I mean, Samurai Jack is a show about a samurai fighting an army of robots, and Jedi are basically just samurai in space. Some might complain that the series is basically just Samurai Jack with a Star Wars paint job, which is fair. But when your biggest complaint is, this show is too much like Samurai Jack, that's a pretty good problem to have. But the main series was still really high quality. It was the first piece of official Star Wars media to include General Grievous. The series isn't deemed canon anymore, which is understandable. If Jedi were as strong in the movies as they were in the show, then the films would be over in 5 minutes. But it's still a good miniseries whether you're a Star Wars fan or not. You also had Megas XLR, a show about this fat, slobbery frat boy named Coop discovering a giant robot in a junkyard and using it to fight an army of aliens known as the Glorft, alongside his best friend Jamie and Kiva, a time traveler from the distant future. I mean, I didn't really watch the show much growing up, probably because the show aimed at a bit of an older demographic. Not because the show was more mature, on the contrary, it was unabashedly stupid, relishing in the wanton destruction and chaos, but just like how Kids Next Door tapped into the wish fulfillment of a child, this show had a similar effect for teenage boys who are really into anime and Halo 2. Which is probably why this was the first Cartoon Network original to have its new episodes premiere on Toonami. It wasn't a deep show by any means, but that was the appeal of it. It was just stupid fun, and there's nothing wrong with that. We also had Ben 10, one of CN's biggest franchises. The series follows a 10-year-old boy named Ben traveling across the country in an RV with his grandpa Max and his cousin Gwen, until one day an alien watch crashes on Earth and fuses to Ben's arm, giving him the power to transfer into 10 different aliens. And later more when they realized they could sell more toys. This show was huge, not just in ratings, but in merchandise. CN obviously had merchandise for their more popular series before, but this one almost felt like it was made with merchandise in mind from the ground up. Each alien in Ben's arsenal had a unique design and power. It was just a premise that any kid could find themselves relating to. The show wasn't just big, it was a phenomenon. Even though I don't remember it airing as much as a lot of CN's other shows, probably due to it being more story-driven, but Ben 10 to this day remains one of CN's biggest IPs, getting several different movies, sequel series, reboots. I never watched it. I mean, I watched a little bit of it in reruns, but I never watched it week to week. I just wasn't really into action shows at the time. It's definitely something I'd be interested in checking out now that I'm older, but have you seen how many episodes there are? It's definitely on my to-watch list, and probably one of the biggest aspects of Cartoon Network's history that I'm completely ignorant of. But not today. While on the topic of action shows, I want to make a detour for a second and talk about a show that isn't technically a Cartoon Network original, but definitely had a big impact. And that would be Teen Titans. Based on the DC Comics team of the same name, Teen Titans follows 5 teenage superheroes, Robin, Starfire, Raven, Cyborg, and Beast Boy, as they protect Jumpsuit from all sorts of superpowered foes. The series was definitely a big departure from the superhero shows that Cartoon Network had been airing up until this point, like Batman and Superman, with it being a lot more comedic and taking on this wannabe anime art style. Plus, outside of Robin, the series followed heroes that your average viewer had likely never heard of before. Because of these factors, a lot of early critics weren't particularly kind to the series, but perception quickly changed once people saw just how good this series really was. All the differences that critics had lambasted the series for would end up becoming the series' greatest strengths, helping it stand out all the more from its contemporaries. One of the series' strongest elements has to be its wonderful cast of characters, with each member of the team feeling unique while also feeling like genuine teenagers, something that can be very hard to do. Each one of the Titans sort of falls into a different teenage archetype, Robin being the no-nonsense straight man, Starfire being the quirky but caring heart of the team, Raven being the cynical goth girl, Cyborg somehow balancing being both the jock and the nerd at the same time, and Beast Boy being the dorky class clown. It was a treat seeing the characters just bounce off each other, and I feel like anyone watching the series would be able to find themselves relating to at least one of the Titans. The show can be very goofy at times, and purposely went out of its way to avoid a lot of the typical superhero conventions, like secret identities just don't exist in the world. They go to the freaking pizza shop in their costumes, they live in a giant tower shaped like the letter T. It's stupid, but in a fun way. The show can also get serious when it needs to be. It was the perfect balance, as each season had a more serious, overarching story arc, while balancing out with more comedic episodic adventures in between. The show can be pretty dark at points, dealing with topics like PTSD, abusive upbringings, racism, loss of a loved one, loss of one's own body. But the next episode Titans could be fighting a witch that trapped them all in a giant gingerbread house or something stupid like that. This show was great, one of Cartoon Network's best, even if it wasn't actually made by Cartoon Network, but by Warner Brothers. Also, its theme song is a bop too, being produced by the Japanese pop band Puffy. I like how the show actually has 2 versions of the theme song. Most episodes air with the English version, with goofier episodes airing with the Japanese one. I kind of feel like it would have made more sense to do the opposite, with the more dramatic episodes having the Japanese opening to match the generally darker tone that most animes airing on TV at the time had, but regardless, it's a great theme. I sure hope they make a cartoon about the people who made it. About time. Shifting away from action and back to comedy, we have Hi Hi Puffy Ami Yumi, starring animated versions of the titular pop singers, the hyperactive girly girl Ami and the snarky and tomboyish Yumi alongside their manager Kaz. They travel around the world getting involved in all kinds of kooky adventures. I remember Cartoon Network promoting the series like crazy prior to its premiere, yet it never really felt like it became all that popular despite the channel's best efforts. The whole thought process behind the series from a marketing perspective just felt odd. I don't know why, but Cartoon Network was really trying to push this band hard in the US for some reason, even giving them a float in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. Like, I don't even think this band was that big in Japan at the time, and J-pop wasn't exactly super big in the US at the time either. From what I could tell, Sam Register, the series creator, was just a really big fan of the band. That's why they did a Teen Titans intro, as he was executive producer on that show. However, I think there might have been some other thought process behind making the show. I have no proof of this, but I think Cartoon was trying to profit off of the teen singer craze that companies like Disney were incorporating at the time. They wanted their own version of a Hilary Duff or Britney Spears. And hey, anime and by extension Japanese culture was becoming big around the mid-2000s, so why not pick a J-pop band and potentially get two demographics? Sadly though, I don't think Puffy ever broke into the West the way the Cartoon Network wanted them to. For one, the real-life musicians were in their 30s when the show came out, so they weren't exactly relatable to their target demo, even if they were aged down to the cartoon. Also, while it was hard to tell since the songs were typically in English, Puffy's music wasn't exactly always age-appropriate for children. But whatever, enough about the band, what about the actual show? It's... how do I describe it? You know how there's some shows where stuff just kinda happens without much of a point or lesson? Hi, Puffy Amiyumi is definitely one of those shows. Not saying that makes the show bad or anything, but it's weird. The show was done in 3 7-minute segments, something that Cartoon Network did a lot in their early days, but I've mostly moved away from by this time. In fact, this is the last Cartoon Network show to use this format, and I kinda feel like 2 11-minute segments would have done better, as it could have added time to have slightly more fleshed out stories. With the episodes being so goofy, it's not the biggest deal in the world, and I do like how they have these in-between segments featuring the actual pop stars. Gives off some Super Mario Bros. Super Show vibes. Hi Puffy Amiyumi might not have the most depth, but still a fine enough show with good music and some creative visuals. Cartoon Network was also big into monkeys at this time. We had Camp Lazlo and My Gym Partner's a monkey. Camp Lazlo followed the adventure of 3 campers, Lazlo, Raj, and Clam, attending a crappy rundown summer camp known as Camp Kidney, with Lazlo's optimistic determination making even the lousiest camp activities into an adventure. The show was created by Joe Murray, who you might recognize as the creator of Rocko's Modern Life. And Camp Lazlo feels like a slightly toned down version of that show. It wasn't as weird and adult as that show was, but don't get it twisted, it was still pretty weird and adult. I really like how the show looks. The show has a very distinct color palette with a lot of tans, yellows, and oranges. These aren't colors that I'm typically drawn to, but I think it works here. It gives the show a very summery vibe. It definitely helps the show stand out. I also really like the sketchy, almost pencil-esque look of the backgrounds. It's honestly just a nice show to look at. Our main trio are all pretty likable, however the show does fall into the trap a lot of shows with this type of format falls into. You know, these shows where there's a super optimistic character who makes the lives of the super cynical character around them miserable. Yeah, it's one of those shows. But still, I think Camp Lazlo was a pretty good show. It's funny, charming, looks nice, has likable characters. The writing can be a bit hit or miss at times, and it never really does anything that's groundbreaking, but it's still a fun time, which is more than I could say for My Gym Partner's a Monkey. Okay, to be fair, I don't think this show is bad, but I do think it's maybe a bit less good than a lot of the other shows Cartoon Network was airing at the time. Following a boy named Adam Lyon, who, due to a clerical error, is transferred to a school for animals. I liked the show as a kid because I was really into zoology, and to be fair, I haven't really watched that much of the series since it aired, but the show just seems kinda gross and annoying for the bits I have seen. Adam is a pretty whiny character, which I mean is understandable, as bullies are constantly trying to eat him and stuff, but there's just not much to him besides that. He's pretty generic. And Jake, his monkey best friend, is a selfish jerk. You ever notice that? How in the 2000s it felt like every pair of friends we saw in the cartoons never actually felt like they had a reason to hang out with each other? It was a very cynical time. There are other side characters too, most of them just fall into your typical archetypes. I don't really want to sound like I hate this show, because I don't. There's some good jokes here and there, but it's definitely one of Cartoon Network's weaker programs. Though fun fact, the show was created by Julie and Timothy Cahill, a married couple, making it the first Cartoon Network original series to be at least partially created by a woman. However, due to the show's relatively low critical reception, I think there's a reason why Cartoon Network usually acts like Steven Universe was their first show to have that honor. And then you have the shows that didn't really last that long, like The Life and Times of Juniper Lee, another short-lived show that has a cult following a young Chinese-American preteen girl who learns that she comes from a long line of magical guardians, who are tasked with keeping the human and monster worlds in balance. Unfortunately, I don't really remember much about this show, so screw it, I'm talking about Sunday Pants. Probably one of the most obscure shows Cartoon Network's ever aired. Sunday Pants was a sketch show made up of a number of different animated shorts. And I'm not sure why, but I remember the show kind of freaked me out when I was a kid. Something about it just seemed off. Shorts were acquired and as such weren't made with Cartoon Network in mind, so many of them were more adult or had slight swearing in them, so I think to a younger me it gave off the vibe of a show that I wasn't supposed to be watching. Because of the content, the show would air pretty late into the night, being the last show to air before Cartoon Network switched over to Adult Swim. New episodes also aired on Sunday due to the name, but it was like the only Cartoon Network show to air on Sundays. Not only that, but I don't remember the show being advertised much. I'm not sure if it ever reran. And then after a month, the show was gone. Yeah, the show only lasted 5 episodes, even though 11 were made, which just made the show feel even more mysterious. And due to the fact these shorts were acquired from various sources, Cartoon Network likely doesn't have the right to air them at this point, making it nearly impossible for the show to ever be made viewable again by legal means. The show doesn't even have a Wikipedia page. This whole show and the history behind it just feels like a fever dream. Even if the show itself, as far as I can tell, is just your run-of-the-mill sketch comedy show. Cartoon Network's turnout in the 2000s was a bit hit or miss in terms of success. When they had a hit, they had a hit, with the channel's best shows of this era easily being able to stand toe-to-toe with the best of the channel's 90s offerings. And I appreciate how varied a lot of the shows of this era were. Like, as much as I love Cartoon Network's output in the 90s, a lot of them did have similar art styles, sense of humors, heck, a lot of them even shared crew members. But in the 2000s, they were a lot more experimental, and I think that's a good thing, even if it resulted in a few misses here or there. Cartoon Fridays also got a rebrand around this time, going by just Fridays and replacing the animated host segments with 2 live-action hosts, Tommy and Zynga, and then Tommy and Tara after Zynga left in 2005. Yes, that's Tommy and Tara, not to be confused with Tom and Sarah, that was Toonami. They would introduce shows with a live audience of kids with silly sketches in between alongside these puppet host characters. It was a bit of a bummer that the animated host segments were gone, but I honestly prefer Fridays more, possibly just because I grew up with it. The original Cartoon Fridays was a bit before my time, but I think there are some valid perks to Fridays. Cartoon Fridays only had a set number of host segments that they would always cycle through, while Friday had new host segments every single week, with the host flying all the way from LA to Atlanta just to shoot, so that's why the ice caps are melting. And Tommy, Zynga, and Tara are all generally good hosts, bring a lot of energy to the presentation. Oftentimes the bumpers each week would follow a vague plot throughout the night, with the cast going camping to celebrate Camp Lazlo's premiere, or Tommy and Tara having to run the block without the crew because they're off for Labor Day. It was honestly really fun, and I believe a worthy successor to the original Cartoon Fridays. And speaking of blocks, Toonami was going through some changes as well. Tom got a brand new design with Tom 3, and honestly I really like how he looks here. He's so swole. Even Sarah got a new redesign, and you could tell this came out around the time when Halo was really popular. But beyond that, it was announced that the block would be moving from its 5 to 7 weekday time slot to a 7 to 11 time slot on Saturday nights only, replacing Saturday Video Entertainment System, a decision that many people weren't really a fan of at the time. Toonami had been a staple of weekday afternoons for years at this point, and now it was only going to air once a week? But looking at it logistically, the decision made sense. TV standards were changing. You just couldn't show that same level of violence that early in the evening anymore. Plus, Toonami fans were starting to grow up. The kids who watched Toonami when they were younger were becoming teenagers, who probably didn't have time to watch 2 or 3 hours of Toonami 5 days a week after school anymore. But once a week on Saturday evenings, it was a lot more manageable. Toonami would continue to air several of the shows they had aired during the weekday lineups, but they got plenty of new shows too, like Dragon Ball GT, the sequel to Dragon Ball Z that unfortunately was not as highly received. The series was made with minimal involvement from Dragon Ball Z's original creator Akira Toriyama, and many fans felt the series suffered as a result. But it wouldn't matter too much because Toonami would soon get a new #1 show, and that show would be Naruto. Following a young teenage outcast going to a special school to learn to become a ninja master, it's hard to understate just how massive the show was for Toonami at its peak. Not since Dragon Ball Z did Toonami have a hit this big. It was another cultural phenomenon, regularly airing outside of Toonami, and even getting a 3-day-long marathon called the Naruto Hondo. I watched the show a little bit just because of how much it would air, but I never really watched it week to week. But even I have to acknowledge the impact it had not just on Toonami, but on anime culture as a whole. They also had One Piece, an anime about a pirate with rubber powers named Luffy and his quest to find a legendary treasure known as the One Piece. One Piece is huge in Japan, holding the record as the best-selling manga series of all time. However, the series has always struggled a bit to find the same success here in the States. One Piece did well on Toonami, but it had some issues, mainly its dub, which was dubbed by 4Kids Entertainment, the people behind the Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh dubs. And because One Piece was a lot closer to Dragon Ball Z than Pokemon in terms of content and tone, 4Kids went ham with edits, removing any and all references to death, violence, tobacco, and sure, most of the anime that Toonami was airing was edited for content anyway, but they went way too far with this one. changing minor things that weren't even that bad, altering major plot points. They gave the anime a rap opening. It was a mess.
Here's how the story goes. We find out by the treasure in the grand line. There's no doubt. The pirate whose eye is on it, he'll sing. I'll be king of the pirates. I'm gonna be king.
While Tommy would eventually premiere the Funimation dub to the series, which while still edited was a lot closer to the source material, I think the damage was already done. But again, the show still didn't do awful on the block, becoming the #2 show just behind Naruto, which I think is a testament of how good the original story was, when it could still gather an audience despite it all. Toonami also had plenty of other shows like Bobobo, a parody series about a guy with a giant yellow afro fighting monsters with magical nose hair. This was my favorite Toonami show as a kid. You had IGPX, Toonami's first original anime made exclusively for the block, a sports anime about robots roller derby. The show generally got a pretty meh reception from audiences, but still an anime made exclusively for Toonami. That was cool. Zatch Bell, which was like Pokemon except replaced the animal abuse with child abuse and replaced Pikachu with frickin' Jimmy Neutron.
I thought we were supposed to be training.
Don't you know that sushi makes us stronger? Come on and eat something!
Wulin Warriors, a Taiwanese puppet show that also got a horrible localized dub, was picked up without the Toonami crew's consent and lasted 2 episodes. Moving on, we also got tons of great Western cartoons as well, cause remember, Toonami was never just an anime block. We got Justice League and its sequel, Justice League Unlimited, which got to premiere on the block, and The Batman, a series that was sort of dismissed when it came out due to being compared to the much more well-received Batman the Animated series. But the show definitely gained a much more vocal fanbase as the years had gone on, who enjoyed the series for its slightly later tone and unique take on the characters. You had Jackie Chan Adventures, a cartoon following a fictitious version of the real-life actor going around collecting these magical artifacts with his wise uncle and mischievous niece. I don't remember much about this show, but I do remember watching it quite a bit at the time. And then you got even more special events, like the Month of Miyazaki, which Toonami aired 4 Studio Ghibli films throughout the month, some of the best anime movies of all time. And since Hayao Miyazaki had a strict no edits rule when it came to his movies, they all aired unedited, which is a bit surprising since some of them could get pretty violent. Princess Mononoke even aired with a TV-14 rating and a parental advisory warning, but still, it was awesome to see. It probably introduced a lot of kids to the magic of Studio Ghibli for the first time. You could argue which era of Toonami was better, the weekday version or the Saturday version, and honestly I think it comes down to personal preference. But despite it all, Toonami was still going strong. But just because Toonami was off the weekday lineup didn't mean that Cartoon Network was leaving that time slot barren, because Cartonic announced the launch of a new block to fill the void Toonami left in the weekday lineup, and that block would be known as Maguzi. Maguzi was a programming block that launched in 2004, created by a lot of the same people who worked on Toonami, designed to be a place for action shows, but action shows that are aimed a tad younger than what was airing on Toonami. The block was hosted by this 10-year-old girl named Erin, voiced by Jessica DeSinco, who would travel below the sea to hang out with the group of underwater monsters and just watch action cartoons. While Maguzi could look like a cheap Toonami wannabe on the surface, the block actually had a lot of personality. Sure, it was similar to Toonami, but definitely had its own vibe, more than something like Saturday Video Entertainment System did. While Toonami was more laid back and chill, Maguzi was more fun and energetic. And the creature designs for the monsters are all really creative. They even had a contest to let fans design their own, which was really cool. But I will say it wasn't as good as Toonami was in the bumper department. They sometimes felt a bit too energetic. Like, girl, why are you skateboarding? Are you even interested in the shows? Maguzi aired lots of different shows, several of which being imported from France, like Totally Spies, a series about a bunch of rich teenage girls who are actually part of a secret spy force known as Whoop, who have to fight crime and save the world, when they're not out shopping, of course. Haha, women do be shopping! Well, I don't really remember this show very well. From what I gathered, it's looked back upon pretty fondly, with a continuation being announced almost 2 decades later. It's also fondly remembered for giving kids lots of niche fetishes, so it has that going for it. We also had Code Lyoko, a show about kids who travel into a digital world to stop an evil rogue AI, with the show being animated in 2D during the scenes in the real world and CGI in the scenes set in cyberspace. The CGI might not age the best, but the show also has a small but strong fanbase even today. These were Maguzi's big heavy hitters, but they had plenty of other shows, like the 2003 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles series being a more modern and mature take on the franchise, alongside shows like Winx Club, Static Shock, Yu-Gi-Oh! Sequel series Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, plus shows I've already discussed like Teen Titans, Ben 10, and Pokemon. Honestly, Maguzi was a pretty cool block. It definitely cemented itself as more than just Toonami Light. And who could forget Tickle You? Most people, actually. Yet during the mid-2000s, Cartoon tried their hands on a preschool block, I guess to compete with Nick Jr. and Playhouse Disney, airing shows like Peppa Pig. This block didn't last long, only 5 months. I understand the logic Cartoon Network was going for. You know, the other two channels have preschool blocks, so we should have one too. I just don't think it works. Cartoon Network has always skewed older than the other channels, and those preschool blocks were established much earlier in their channel's lifetime. You can't just add a preschool block 13 years in out of nowhere. It just wasn't a good fit. And Cartoon Network never made this mistake again. Cartoon Theater was also still going at this time, however, some of their selections were beginning to change. As they started airing live-action movies, starting with the premiere of Kangaroo Jack in 2005. To be fair, maybe the marketing confused them too. Up until this point, the most live-action channels they aired had probably been, I don't know, the Banana Splits or something. A lot of people were not happy about this change. I mean, this was Cartoon Network after all. Now, some of the movies they showed I can kind of give a pass, you know, like hybrid films like Who Framed Roger Rabbit and Osmosis Jones. But then you got stuff like Batman, Spider-Man, and The Goonies, which while still being popular films that Cartoon Network's primary audience would probably enjoy, still felt a bit out of place. You also had all the acquired programming that Cartoon Network aired during this period that didn't really fit into any specific blocks.
Like What's New, Scooby-Doo?
A sort of back-to-basics approach to the Scooby-Doo formula after the franchise had been taken in a darker direction with the at-the-time recent direct-to-DVD films like Zombie Island. This time featuring the gang traveling all around the world in different countries. But outside of that and some slightly redesigned outfits, it was a pretty basic Scooby-Doo series. But I also think it was what the franchise needed at the time. You had Duck Dodgers following the adventures of Daffy Duck as a space pilot, based on the old classic Looney Tunes short of the same name, and Baby Looney Tunes, which, look, I know the series gets a lot of hate due to having very little slapstick, not really fitting the Looney Tunes brand, but I think for what it is, the show does what it sets out to do. There was Shaolin Showdown. Is this design racist? Following a team of Shaolin monks, each with the power of one of the four elements, going around clutching these mythical artifacts known as the Shinga Wu in order to prevent them from falling into the hands of evil. I loved this show as a kid. The powers of the Shinga Wu were all super creative, and whenever the good guys and bad guys would touch the item at the same time, they'd have to compete in a Shaolin Showdown, which would be some kind of game like tag or something. This was my generation's Squid Game. I love that sometimes the bad guys would win, and the series would remember that. With them having the Shinga Wu they won in later episodes, it really helped make the stakes feel more real. Mucha Lucha was another show I watched a lot, about a bunch of kids going to a school to become luchadors. Just a fun slice of life show. It was cool seeing a show that tied into Mexican culture. You also had Robot Boy, the Cramp Twins, Crypto the Super Dog, Ozzy and Drix, Atomic Betty. Honestly, looking back, Cartoon Network during this era had so much variety. You had funny shows, action shows, classic shows, preschool shows, Japanese shows, French shows. It felt like no matter who you were, there was at least something for you to watch. And the presentation was just as great as ever. Like, I'm not gonna act like every show they aired was the best or anything. The channel wasn't perfect, but this was a great time to be a Cartoon Network fan. But it couldn't last forever, as troubling times for the channel would soon be imminent. In 2006, Cartoon Network premiered Reanimated, their first original live-action animated hybrid film. Following a young boy named Jimmy who ends up seeing cartoon characters after having his brain transplanted with the brain of a famous cartoonist after an accident. Now, Cartoon Network had been airing live-action movies for a while at this point, but this was different. They made this one, and they were marketing this movie hard. Little did anyone know that this movie was basically a pilot for Cartoon Network's newest hybrid series, Out of Jimmy's Head. People were not happy. Live-action movies were one thing, but a live-action show, and a Cartoon Network produced one at that. That was on a whole other level. Now, to be fair, the show was a hybrid series, not unlike, say, Space Ghost Coast to Coast. Well, that show was probably like 80% animation and 20% live action. Those numbers were switched here. The show itself just wasn't anything special or unique. It was just a generic live-action kids sitcom following a kid talking to his schizophrenic hallucinations. It was boring and felt really out of place on the network. But I think the people behind the scenes saw the success live-action sitcoms were having on channels like Disney Channel and Nickelodeon, and both channels were leaning harder and harder into live-action around this time. I mean, live-action is cheaper to produce than animation is, and has a much wider reach. But it just didn't feel like it was a fit for the spirit of what Cartoon Network was supposed to represent. Not just because it was live-action, though that definitely didn't help, but because it just felt so generic and corporate. It was clear that Cartoon Network really wanted the show to be a hit, with them even ending Fridays and replacing it with Fried Dynamite, hosted by the stars of Out of Jimmy's Head, which just did not have the same charm. Not that it was the actor's fault, but just felt like it was trying too hard to be hip and lol so random. This was the era where that style of comedy was really starting to take hold with the rise of YouTube and meme culture, and CN tried to lead into this fad, ending the CN City era and introducing the Yes era, featuring these bumpers of characters standing on top of these red backgrounds doing random things. Not only does it feel like a step down from what came before, during the Sea City era, but it wasn't even good in its own right. These bumpers were annoying. It sort of came off kind of unsettling due to their eerie lack of music.
Television tastes funny.
Oddly enough, they still incorporate a lot of reused footage from the Sea and City bumpers into the Yes era, with these psychedelic filters on them, which is kinda cool, I guess? It's interesting. But this whole era just felt confused, especially when compared to the back-to-back home runs that were the Powerhouse era and the Sea and City era. This era did have some new shows though, like Squirrel Boy, made by Everest Peck, the creator of the cult classic adult cartoon Duckman. Squirrel Boy follows the adventures of an average generic boy named Andy and the obnoxious best friend, Rodney the Squirrel. Yeah, it's another one of those. From what I gather, people online still consider this series one of Cartoon Network's weakest shows. It seems like audiences felt the same, as the show did not last very long, and I can kinda get why. With his character dynamics being so similar to other shows airing on the network at the time, I can see how it could have had trouble standing out for the crowd. But this is another show that Cartoon Network seems like they just refused to let on to streaming, so I wasn't able to rewatch it in preparation for this retrospective. So while I can't attest to its quality, I'm going to say that I loved this show as a kid. I barely remember anything that happened in it, but this show was my jam when I was younger. I just remember it had a very we don't care random style of humor to it. I mean, the main characters are played by Invader Zim and Bobby Hill.
And by the end, it was downright grim. But overall, I wasn't talking to you. I was talking to the hat.
I feel like the show deserves at least a 7 on IMDb on that fact alone. You also had Class of 3000, a series created by rapper Andre 3000, following Sonny Bridges, a rapper retired from the rap game to become a music teacher for a group of ethnically diverse mid-2000s children. I don't remember watching this one very much, but I do know it has a bit of a cult following. It is generally looked back upon fondly nowadays as one of the channel's biggest hidden gems. We also got Cartoon Network Invasion. 5 shows, Foster's, and Eddie, Camp Lazlo, My Jim Par's a Monkey, and Billy and Mandy, all having episodes centered around aliens invading the Earth and attempt to rob the planet of all of its cheese. This was mind-blowing to see as a kid. It wasn't a full-on crossover, but the story did develop throughout all 5 shows. I really like the sense of progression here, with each week get to see a little bit more of the aliens. It was really cool seeing these different creators having their own different takes on the same overall plot, with some going for more of an eerie vibe, while others went just plain stupid. I admit it does create some total whiplash with all 5 parts technically supposed to be part of the same story, but regardless, it was still a really fun and memorable marketing stunt. And it was nice knowing that despite the Yes era being one of Cartoon Network's worst, we were still getting some pretty good stuff out of it at the very least. Meanwhile, on the Toonami side of things, gah! Tom, you alright? You seem to have something on your face. Actually, I think that is your face. We were introduced to Tom 4 around this time, featuring the most drastic redesign yet. So Tom was always designed to age with the audience, with each Tom model up until this point becoming progressively taller and bulkier. But by this time, it was believed by the higher-ups that the kids who watched Toonami in the 90s were all grown up. They weren't watching anime on Saturday nights anymore, they were going out and hanging out with friends. So on the 10-year anniversary of the block's launch, we were given this sort of soft reboot of Tom, with this new design, in order to sort of start the slate clean and attract a new audience of kids who become new Toonami fans. It just doesn't look the best, and because Tom has a face now, it meant that the people behind Toonami had to make new lip-sync animations every time a new show was added to the block. They couldn't just reuse footage of his head bobbing up and down like we used to. Tom was also no longer in space but on this jungle planet, his hair was gone with no explanation, being replaced with these 2 other sidekicks, Flash and D, who weren't bad per se, but they didn't leave much of an impression. The block itself also wasn't doing very well around this time either, with shows being randomly added and removed at a whim due to executive meddling. And new shows were becoming few and far between, with the block just kind of coasting on One Piece, Dragon Ball Z, and way too much Naruto, which was mostly in filler at this time. And as time went on, the block would only continue to shrink in size. And if you thought Toonami was in bad shape, you should take a look at Bagoozy. They were getting even less new shows, or mostly just be giving hand-me-downs for either Toonami or Cartoon Network proper. And Aaron was mysteriously missing. Only the monsters remained, which can only mean one thing: they ate her. I feel bad for Bagoozy. It had some unique ideas, and the idea of a block for later action shows was pretty interesting, but I think it struggled just due to there being other places to get these shows. The more action-heavy shows could just air on Toonami, and the later shows could just air on Cartoon Network proper, causing Bagoozy to get kind of caught in the middle. Things were looking kind of bleak for the network, and things would only get worse, as on January 31st, 2007, the Boston bomb scare would take place. In order to promote the Adult Swim film Aqua Teen Hunger Force : movie for theaters, light brights featuring the characters were placed alongside several major cities, one of which being Boston. The boss and chief of police saw these signs and, for some reason, thought there was a bomb, causing the whole city to be put on lockdown. I know this was post 9/11 and terrorist attacks like this were unfortunately more common around this time, but also like, I don't know, you're telling me no one on the force was an Aqua Teen fan? I mean, this wasn't an issue for any of the other cities where the lights were put up.
I stand corrected, Lee. They're not Moonanites, but human-sized fast food icons. We regret the error, regret it sincerely, and are thankful it did not shut down any major roads, bridges, trains, or rivers.
Regardless, the entire city of Boston was placed on lockdown until the confusion was cleared up. This made national news. Cartoon Network agreed to pay the city of Boston $2 million in damages, and Jim Samples, the president of Cartoon Network, chose to step down, blaming himself for letting it happen under his watch. Jim Samples is often looked back upon really highly as this Cartoon Network president, and deservingly so, but I also think it's easy to overlook his shortcomings. His tenure wasn't perfect by any means. He greenlit Tickle You, he was the man behind the Yes era, and he was the person responsible for live action making its jump to the network, at least initially. He definitely wasn't without his flaws, but personally, that doesn't take too much away from what a great legacy he left on the channel. So many great shows, CN City, Fridays, Magoozy, frickin' Adult Swim, all happened under his watch, and he deserves so much credit for that. Jim Samples was replaced by Stuart Snyder, who had previously worked for WWE Game Tap, and he was going to be able to take Cartoon Network in a new direction, but the road getting there was definitely rocky. The Yes era came to an end and we got the summer and fall era of Cartoon Network, neither of which lasted very long, featuring clips of live-action kids rocking out to CeeLo Green and the Hives. There's not really much to these eras, both only lasting a combined year, which is odd they kept the fall era through the winter and spring. Though I do think that both of these eras are pretty aesthetically pleasing at the least. No CN City, but better than the Yes era. Nothing great, nothing awful, just kind of unremarkable. However, things would go south in a hurry, as around this time, Toonami would come to an end. This was tragic, but it made a lot of sense. The block had been on life support for years at this point, and with the internet becoming more common, there was less of an incentive to wait to watch censored anime months after they had aired in Japan. The crew were only given 2 weeks notice before the block ended, but they saw the writing on the wall and were able to make one last bumper ahead of time, with Tom saying a final goodbye. Anime would begin to leave the channel not long after, with the exception of a couple of the more toy-centric series like Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds, Bakugan, and Beyblade. And while Toonami would thankfully be revived in 2012 on Adult Swim, that didn't change the fact that this was still the end of an era. Magoozy also came to an end, being replaced by Master Control, which, while not as cool, I still kind of liked. You could go online and pick one of 3 teams, and whichever team won got to pick the lineup for the day. I remember getting really invested in this as a kid, but the shows that aired on Master Control were pretty much the same shows that aired on the channel the rest of the time, so it didn't really feel that special, and Master Control would come to an end not long after. Not helping things was that from 2007 to 2009, a ton of Cartoon Network shows were either ending or getting pretty close to ending. Pretty much all of them. This was a turning point for the network, and a lot of people who grew up with Cartoon Network started to abandon it around this time, as they found it become almost recognizable from what came before. Fridays was gone, Toonami was gone, most of the shows were gone. It felt like Stu Snyder was trying to wipe the entire slate clean, and as such, he was public enemy #1 for many Cartoon Network fans. But a new era of Cartoon Network was just around the corner. Would it be able to win back the hearts of the fans? In 2008, Cartoon Network rebranded yet again with the Nood era, featuring these little white pop vinyl creatures called the Noods, who would act as the channel's mascot, taking on attributes of different Cartoon Network characters when interacting with different blobs of color. I have a lot of nostalgia for this era. It had a lot of personality, though when looking at it objectively, it has its fair share of issues. It's all set in this white void, this was 2008 and that was kind of the style of the time. You had the iPhone, the Wii, so it sort of has that vibe, which isn't bad, but it's kind of a downgrade from a fully realized city. We got character interactions with the Nood, but there was no dialogue, so it wasn't nearly as impactful. But these figures are still pretty cute. I wish they actually sold these. Cartoon Network logo even changed to this variation, all white, which I wasn't really a big fan of. The bumpers also had a new narrator, Greg Sipes, and later on, Will Arnett.
Coming up next, it's Pokemon Movie 10, The Rise of Darkrai on Cartoon Network.
Yeah, Todd, Pokemon Movie 10, Rise of Darkrai is coming up next. Now give me a frickin' racist! Overall, I like the Nood era a lot. It may not have been as good as the CN City era, but was better than the Yes, Summer, or Fall era at the very least. Around this time, Fried Dynamite ended.
Oh, thank Christ, we're moving on!
So with the loss of that, plus Toonami, Sam needed a new place to premiere their comedy and action shows, which led to the creation of 2 new blocks, Har Har Thursdays and You Are Here. Har Har Thursdays was the channel's new main block for comedies, airing every Thursday night? Yeah, even as a kid I thought this was weird. Friday nights made sense. It was the start of the weekend and a lot of kids could stay up late, or were having sleepovers at their friends' houses. But Thursdays? Kids had school the next day and homework to do. I still don't know why this decision was made. The block's aesthetics were kind of cool at least, rainbow on black, which fit the Nood era while also standing out. Though I never really got why the Noods in these promos were 2D when they were 3D literally everywhere else. But aesthetics are one thing, how are the shows? The block had several over the years, and with all the cancellations going on at this time, these new shows had some big shoes to fill. So what do we got? First we had Chowder, following the adventures of a chef's apprentice named Chowder trying to learn to become a master cook from his master Mung Dal, alongside Mung Dal's nagging wife Truffles and grumpy employee Schnitzel. This is a fun show, being super off the walls and wacky, with lots of random humor and fourth wall jokes. I really like how the show looks, incorporating some mixed media elements in fun and creative ways. What always stood out to me was the fact that the patterns on the clothing are always on a separate layer from the characters, so they don't move alongside the characters. It might be a bit jarring, but I think it's very unique and helps add to the show's style. Chowder's not a super deep show, you don't really go into Chowder for the story or the characters, you go in for the jokes. And sometimes the jokes can feel a bit immature and childish, but if you go into the show with the right mindset, it's a really fun time. You also had the marvelous misadventures of Flapjack, following a naive and optimistic young boy named Flapjack and his grouchy and morally questionable mentor Captain Knuckles, as they search the high seas in search of adventure in the legendary Candy Island. This was the original Rick and Morty, and I'm not even joking. This was another good show. The show could be really funny at times, with Flapjack's kindness and optimism and Knuckles' cynical selfishness making great contrasts. As a kid I liked the show, but I was also kind of freaked out by it. And from what I could tell, a lot of other people felt the same, with tons of random terrifying close-ups that would jump scare you. I remember I saw this image in one episode out of the corner of my eye while on the computer. It scared me so much I dropped the show entirely, not even watching reruns. But looking back on the show now that I'm older, I can appreciate it a lot more, with it sort of carry on the spirit that Courage and Billy and Mandy had. Both these shows were staples of Har Har Thursdays for its entire run, but there was one show that Cartoon Network would air on the block that would change everything. It wasn't even a show that they made, it was an acquired series from Canada.
Their flag is a fucking leaf!
And that show would be Total Drama Island. Total Drama Island was a reality parody show featuring 22 teenagers living on an island and competing in challenges in order to win a $100,000 grand prize, a la Survivor, with one contestant being voted off each week. The show came out right as reality shows were really starting to hit it big, so to have a cartoon parody the tropes of them, while also taking their best elements, it's no wonder why the show became a hit. Each of the 22 characters fits a different teenage stereotype, from the goth, to the mean girl, to the party dude, and so on. With so much variety, you're bound to find yourself liking at least a couple of the characters, making it easy to get invested in the romance, and the betrayals, and the, well, drama of it all. Add to it the fiendishly charismatic and sadistic host, Chris McClane, you got yourself a recipe for something really special. The show just felt so fresh compared to everything else Cartoon Network was airing at the time. When making Total Drama Island, the creators said they wanted to make a show for teens, believing that it was an untapped market. And Total Drama Island definitely delivers on that front. While it wasn't the first Cartoon Network show to air with a PG rating, it was the first big one, with episodes being censored to a somewhat hilarious degree.
Like how you're a two-faced, backstabbing, lying little, no-good, selfish, heartless, pushy, bossy, mean bully of a girl!
When I was a kid, I thought how badly the censoring was here was like part of the joke. Like it was supposed to be awkwardly done in-universe. Not an actual attempt at censorship. They really didn't think much of our intelligence, did they? Still, some things you just couldn't edit, like the episode where the underage teenage girl loses her top on international television. My mom saw this part in a rerun. You know how hard it is to explain to a mom? No, that wasn't an adult cartoon, that's just what Cartoon Network deems acceptable nowadays. I got really invested in Total Drama Island as it was airing. The finale just felt like a real event in ways other season finales just didn't. And I clearly wasn't alone, as this show was a massive hit for the network, easily becoming one of Cartoon Network's biggest shows during this era, becoming so big that Cartoon Network started acquiring other Canadian shows from the same company, Teletoons. Like 16, made by the same people as Total Drama Island and featuring almost the exact same voice cast as Total Drama Island, 16 follows the adventures of 6 teens just kind of hanging out at a mall dealing with teen problems. I liked the show growing up, but not as much as Whole Drama Island. The show had a real laid-back attitude to it, feeling more like the type of live-action shows you would see on Nickelodeon or Disney Channel as opposed to your standard Cartoon Network show. I really like how for the most part the entire show takes place in the mall. It's rare we see the characters' homes, and I'm not even sure if we ever see them in school. The show had some continuity which was nice, with ongoing romantic subplots that would change the status quo. Overall, 16 was a pretty fun time, and while not as big as Whole Drama Island, still did quite well from what I can recall. In an attempt to catch lightning in a bottle a third time, we also had Stoked, also made by the same people, featuring the same voice cast and the same art style as 16. Stoked was basically 16, but at a beach resort instead of a mall. This one didn't nearly last as long, with the second season not even airing here in the States and... Wait, do you hear that? Yes, we also got the release of Johnny Test, one of Cartoon Network's most infamous acquisitions, about a young preteen boy named Johnny who annoys his super genius sisters Susan and Mary alongside his genetically modified talking dog Dookie. The show used to be hated back when it was running, with people saying that it was a bad Dexter's Lab knockoff, just with the gender swapped. However, I would not go as far as to call the show a ripoff. Sure, it has a similar premise, but the execution and humor is fairly different. In fact, if I had to compare the show to anything, it would probably be Fairly Odd Parents, because the creator of the show, Scott Fellows, used to work on that series. While people hated this series, I honestly never found it nearly as bad as other people did. The show was fine. Not anything special or deep or anything, but it was a perfectly average show that had some genuinely funny episodes and a surprisingly strong sense of continuity compared to your standard 11-minute comedy, which I always thought was kinda cool. Though I think part of the reason the show got so much hate as it did was because of how much Cartoon Network would air it, and because of how long the show ran. I mean, you could tell that the show was cheap to make, so why not just keep making more of it? But the show wasn't that bad or anything, and I do have a bit of nostalgia towards it. You also had Goosebumps, you know, the live-action show from the 90s. Also from Canada? Yeah, that aired. I don't know why it aired, but it aired. And that was Har Har Thursday's main lineup. Not that bad, all things considered, though a bit of a step down from Fridays. The block being also be shorter than Fridays probably didn't help, only being 2 hours long with shows shuffling in and out. But the block wasn't bad, and I watched it a lot growing up. As for action shows, you had You Are Here, the replacement for Toonami. I never really liked the name You Are Here, it doesn't really roll off the tongue, but they had this cool gold nude that I thought looked pretty cool. I'm coping so hard right now, this replaced Tom. You Are Here didn't air anime like Toonami or Maguzi did, it was all American-made shows, with their killer app easily being Star Wars The Clone Wars, not to be confused with Star Wars Clone Wars. Star Wars The Clone Wars takes place between episodes 2 and 3 of the prequel trilogy, focusing on Obi-Wan and Anakin alongside Anakin's new Padawan Ahsoka, fighting in the titular Clone Wars. Spearheaded by Dave Filoni in his awesome cowboy hat, the series is often considered to be not just one of the best action shows Cartoon Network ever aired, but to some, one of the best pieces of Star Wars media ever made, with elements from the series still appearing in Star Wars media to this day, for better or for worse. Clone Wars was a massive hit for the channel, on par with Total Drama, and like Total Drama, really pushed the boundaries for what they could get away with on a kids channel, airing with a PG-V rating and getting away with lots of on-screen death. But Star Wars has always been pretty violent despite being for kids, so I guess it gets a pass. But if that wasn't enough, You Are Here also saw the release of Ben 10 Alien Force, a sequel to Ben 10 following an older Ben and Gwen alongside ex-villain Kevin, continuing their adventures in a more serialized and action-heavy format. You also had some less popular but still beloved series like Secret Saturdays, about a family of cryptozoologists traveling around the world going on adventures in a style similar to Johnny Quest. And Batman Brave and the Bold, the newest take on Batman, with the gimmick being that each episode has him teaming up with a different DC superhero, as well as being inspired by the character's earlier Silver Age appearances, which honestly is a good way to help the series stand out. The series was very divisive when it first came out, as any Batman series isn't the animated series is, but as time went on it definitely grew a cult following. For a little I've seen of the show, it seems like a fun time. Also, Johnny Test aired on the block for a bit. Okay, I'm starting to see why people hated that show so much. And that was You Are Here. Honestly, pretty good all things considered. Didn't have a ton of shows, but with Star Wars and Ben 10 being such heavy hitters for the network, it's hard to argue that the block did do its job. It wasn't as good as Toonami was at its peak, but was never going to be. And the block should be judged as its own thing. And as its own thing, I think the block was pretty good. I think Har Har Thursdays and You Are Here both did a good job paving the way for the new direction that Stu Snyder would be taking the network. Cartoon Theater was also gone by this point, being replaced with a new block called Flicks, which is pretty much the same thing, though they were airing a lot more live-action movies around this time, and the standard for live-action kid movies, especially around this time, wasn't generally very high, but they still had some good movies from time to time. On the topic of movies though, this is around the time Cartoon Network started airing the Thumb movies. These were a series of old direct-to-video spoofs from the late 90s. My only explanation is that I assume these movies were dirt cheap to license. Because why else would CNN air these? Around this time, Cartoon Network also started airing these series of shorts between some of their other programming, known as Thumb Wrestling Federation. And guys, I think we found it. We finally found peak fiction! So growing up, I always assumed that the Thumb movies and Thumb Wrestling Federation were like connected in some way, but they weren't. Thumb Wrestling Federation was its own thing, created by Larry Schwartz, who worked on several Nicktoons Network shows like Kappa Mikey and 3 Delivery. In fact, Thumb Wrestling Federation even aired its first season on Nicktoons Network before moving over to Cartoon Network, because Cartoon Network just had to get their hands on it. Thumb Wrestling Federation was a wrestling parody series featuring talking thumbs. On one side you had the Mighty Dexteras, and on the other hand you had the dastardly Evil Sinistras, both vying for control of the TWF belt. These shorts aired between programming during 2 dedicated blocks, the Thumbtastic After School Event, and later on, the TWF Saturday Crush Zone. I never got into wrestling as a kid. I tried a few times, but the barrier for entry just felt too high. But the way kids got into wrestling, me and my brothers got to Thumb Wrestling Federation. And I will say, for a series of shorts just designed to air between shows as time filler, they went above and beyond. Not only was the show genuinely funny, with its tongue-in-cheek nature and fun cast of cartoonish characters, but the series actually did a good job of telling a story that would flow throughout the season, with twists and betrayals just like in real wrestling. The show was all done in a lighthearted and comedic way, but for what it was effective nonetheless. There are even shorts in between the shorts, either showing the characters trash-talking each other before a match, or fleshing out the world building. Like seriously, they did not have to go this above and beyond. I mean, some of the championship fights are practically regular broadcast length. Thumb Wrestling Federation was a big part of me and my brother's childhoods, as odd as that may sound. I remember playing the games on the Thumb Wrestling Federation website, and made my own Thumb Wrestling OCs on the Thumb Wrestling Federation fan and wiki. My older sister even burned some of the episodes onto a blank DVD, and made paper cutout thumb masks for my brother. I could go on and on about this series, and while Cartoon Network eventually did drop the series, leaving the 5th and final season completely unaired here in the States, the series still managed to leave a huge impact, at least on me.
Dick Thompson, will you marry me? Together, we can crush 1,000,000 peasants!
Sorry, Colonel, you're not my type!
Anyway, now that I've talked about Thumb Wrestling Federation for longer than most of the other shows in this video, that was Cartoon Network's main output during the Nood era. And honestly, it wasn't that bad. Though I'd be lying if I say it didn't feel like a bit of a downgrade from what came before. There were definitely good stuff to watch, but a lot of the lineup was sort of being carried by the Canadian imports. While Har Har Thursdays and You Are Here were both good, and definitely had their own identity, they weren't as good as Friday or Toonami. But hey, things could be worse. That wasn't a request, you know. 2009, often stated to be the worst year in Cartoon Network's entire history as a channel, for a couple of reasons. For one, the channel got a new logo, this time being an all-black background with white text. Just like the all-white logo, I don't really like it all that much. The black and white checkerboard just feels iconic, and I feel like these two logos just complicate the aesthetic. But on top of that, it was also the first year since 1994 where Cartoon Network did premiere a single new animated series, which stuck extra hard considering that, like I said earlier, from 2007 to 2009, a lot of classic shows were coming to an end. 2009 in particular saw the end of not only Foster's Hope for Imaginary Friends, but also Ed, Edd and Eddy, putting an end to not only Cartoon Network's longest lasting original series, but the last cartoon still on the air. But that wasn't to say we didn't get any new series, it just means we wish we didn't. As 2009 was the year Cartoon Network launched CN Reel, a programming block dedicated to airing live-action programming on Wednesday nights. I feel like Cartoon Network had been slowly building towards this for a while now, without Jimmy's head really feeling like the testing grounds for this. But with Nickelodeon and Disney Channel moving more towards live-action programming around this time, I guess the higher-ups of Cartoon Network thought it was time for them to do the same. However, while Nickelodeon and Disney Channel specialized mostly in sitcoms, Cartoon Network decided to go in a different direction. Reality shows, which feels really weird looking back on it. Granted, this was when reality television was at its peak in popularity, but it seems like it would have been a lot easier to just copy what their competitors were doing, since that was already proven to be a success. Maybe they wanted to stand out for the competition, maybe it had to do with the writer's strike going on around this time, or maybe total drama's success had something to do with it. We may never know, but for whatever reason, live action on Cartoon Network was now a reality, something that the channel was heavily trying to push. As opposed to the past, where it was just sort of like a side thing, with CN Reel shows getting lots of reruns early on, and Cartoon Network promoting it heavily with bumpers featuring musician Andrew WK, who was practically the block's mascot.
Andrew WK, live in our living room!
and people did not respond positively to Seeing Real. To many, this was Cartoon Network's jumping the shark moment. But just how bad was it? 6 shows premiered at the launch of Seeing Real, so let's go through them, shall we? There was The Othersiders, a ghost hunting show. Survive This, an acquired series from Canada about a group of teens trying to learn to survive in the forest. Destroy Build Destroy, a reality competition show hosted by Andrew WK, which 2 teams had to destroy each other's vehicles, and then use the scraps to build a new vehicle to compete in some kind of competition, only for the losing team's vehicle to be destroyed in the end, hence the title. Do What Would Happen, which is basically just Mythbusters, only without the actual science and myths, which kind of gets rid of a lot of the appeal of Mythbusters. One of the teams would be like, what if we made a giant pizza? And then they would just make it, I guess. Bobby Says, which just showed viral YouTube videos with commentary, like a kid-friendly version of Tosh.0, and Brain Rush, a game show where contestants had to answer trivia questions while riding a roller coaster, which sounds like a fun premise until you realize that most of the episodes is just people screaming. Out of all the shows, Destroy Build Destroy and Do What Would Happen were probably the best. I mean, Destroy Build Destroy was the only one that actually had a kind of unique premise. All the other Seeing Real shows were just cheap rip-offs of more popular reality shows that you could already watch on other networks. And while Do What Would Happen was also a rip-off, it at least had a kind of fun energy to it.
Let's glue it on. Oh yeah, cause glue on the bottom of pizza is just the new condiment.
But neither shows were anything that great. I mostly just watched them when there was nothing else on. But hey, that was at least better than the other shows, which I tended to try to actively avoid. These were the shows that seemed to resonate the most with audiences as well. You can tell because they were the only 2 shows that actually lasted past the year. Yeah, besides these 2 exceptions, all these shows flopped hard, which is why I feel like a lot of the hate behind Seeing Real is a tad overblown. It was bad early on when Cartoon Network was really pushing the block, but after a month or so, most of the shows were gone, and those that survived were regulated mostly just to 1 night a week, with occasional reruns sprinkled here and there. But channel was still mostly animated programming. It wasn't that bad. I prefer Cartoon Network to stay animation only, but I wouldn't have been that against live action programming if the shows were actually good. But the shows on Seeing Real really weren't. They were just cheaper versions of more successful shows you could find on other channels. Had they gone with the Nickelodeon or Disney approach and went with live action sitcoms for their launch, I feel like the block might have done better. But even then, I just feel like live action programming just didn't have much of an audience on the channel to begin with. However, while Cartoon Network didn't make any new shows in 2009 outside of the Seeing Real stuff, that didn't mean we didn't get anything new, because we got the premiere of Total Drama Action. What the heck happened? Talk about a downgrade. Total Drama Action follows a similar format to Total Drama Island, only this time instead of being set on an island, it's set on a film set, with all the challenges being based around different movie genres, which admittedly is a really fun premise, but that's all Total Drama Action really has going for it. The season features half the cast as season 1 did, with most of the characters being the ones who made it pretty far in Island, which on paper sounds like a good idea since those characters were the ones who were the most fleshed out. But most of their arcs had already finished in Island, so it would have been nice to maybe give some of the characters who got eliminated early sometime in the spotlight. Due to having a smaller cast, episodes alternate between elimination challenges and reward challenges in order to fill out the 27 episode season. And while I wouldn't go as far as to call the reward episodes fillers since they still move the character arcs along, it did kind of kill the intrigue when you knew that nobody was getting eliminated in that particular episode. But all that could be excused if the writing of the season was still good, but it wasn't. Like, I know the characters in Total Drama Island were kind of stereotypes, intentionally so, but let's take you up to 11 here. Everyone is flanderized. Characters don't do things because things that the characters would do. They do things just because that's the things that the writers want to happen. They set up Justin as the villain of the season only to give up halfway and change it to Courtney, who, yeah, could be kind of nasty in Island, but they push it up to 11 here. She's not fun to hate like Heather was. She's just unpleasant. So yeah, between the lack of new shows, the cancellation of old shows, the drop in quality of their acquired series, and of course Seeing Real, it became easy to see why so many people consider 2009 to be Cartoon Network's worst year. However, despite all the problems Cartoon Network was going through at the time, I do think the hate was a bit overblown. Like, at the time, people were saying that the channel was dead, but I mean, they still had good shows airing at the time, and Seeing Real, for all its faults, didn't take up that much time after its initial launch. I said that Cartoon Network here was still doing better than it was early on when all they had to air was, I don't know, Buford and the Galloping Ghost. But it did seem like the channel was at a low point. But as they say, things are often darkest before the dawn, and sometimes all a struggling channel needs is that one show to light a spark, change everything for the better, and in 2010, Cartoon Network got that spark.
Do you know what time it is? 11:30. Actually, it's ADVENTURE TIME! Yeah!
If Adventure Time with Finn and Jake follows the adventures of two adopted brothers, Finn, an honorable if somewhat overzealous human boy who strives to become a righteous hero, and Jake, a caring but lazy magic dog who has the power to stretch and shape his body to any form he wishes. Together, the two travel around the magical land of Ooo, which is actually a post-apocalyptic Earth, going on adventures and trying to help whoever they can. When this series first premiered on Cartoon Network, it felt like a breath of fresh air for the channel. There's something about the show that felt so unique. Land of Ooo is such a creative setting, taking obvious inspiration from old school video games like Super Mario Bros. And tabletop RPGs like Dungeons & Dragons, but still definitely feeling like its own thing. The addition of having it not just be your typical fantasy world, but a post-apocalyptic version of Earth not only helps make the setting stand out, but also allows for the series to tackle stories that they wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. It felt like a world where literally anything could happen. It kind of reminds me of Samurai Jack in that regard. The characters are also really great, seeming simple on the surface but becoming more and more complex as the series went on. Every character has more going on with them than it first appears. Even minor ones who seem incidental at first often come back and have their own arcs. Despite how weird the show is at first glance, trust me, the show is weird. There's an eternal logic to everything. It's out by the show's strong sense of continuity and serialization, which, while being commonplace now, was pretty uncommon for comedy-focused series at the time. The show also felt more adult than other Cartoon Network programming, being one of the first Cartoon Network originals to air with a PG rating. And they got away with a lot, allowing the series to attract not just a child audience, but a teen and young adult audience as well. And boy did this show attract an audience, becoming a massive hit right out the gate, up there with Powerpuff Girls and Ben 10 in terms of success, which was definitely the shot in the arm that the channel needed to get out of its funk. The series had its problems, of course. While the series does have a changing status quo, it can often feel like the crew behind the series can sometimes be a bit too hesitant to change the status quo that much, often making big changes only to kind of backpedal on them. The show could also be a bit too weirdly philosophical at points, especially near the end of the show's run. And while I never really mind the romantic subplots as much as other people did, they could drag a bit too long. But none of those flaws take away from how great the show is. Adventure Time is honestly one of the most important cartoons ever made in my opinion. Its success changed the way so many modern cartoons are written, and you can see its influence not just in Cartoon Network's programming going forward, but for animation as a whole. So many tropes we see in animated programming nowadays, they all started here. And yet, despite the number of shows it's influenced, I feel like Adventure Time still has a certain charm that is yet to be recaptured. The premiere of Adventure Time marked a shift for the whole network, and while 2009 might have been one of the channel's worst years, 2010 proved to be one of their best. Clearly the higher-ups were seeing that what was happening before just wasn't working, and as such the channel got a bit of a refresh. Shows like Chowder, Flapjack, and 16 slowly began to be phased out, and the Nood era came to a close, being replaced with the Check It era. I have a fondness for these bumpers, though I acknowledge this might just be because of nostalgia, though I think they're still pretty appealing, reincorporating the classic black and white checkerboard aesthetic, though in a way that felt much more modern. Though this was around the time where TV channels were starting to focus on bumpers less and less, as the rise of streaming services like Netflix and Hulu were causing more and more people to drop cable, and with fewer people watching, companies could no longer waste the valuable commercial time. So any bumpers after this point were always going to be a bit of a downgrade from what came before, but that's far from a Cartoon Network exclusive problem. The channel also got a new logo around this time, which they still use to this day, being the longest lasting variant, and honestly, I think it might be my favorite. It does have a bit of that 2010 sterileness look to it, like, we're too serious to be slightly slanted, no quirkiness here, but it looks clean. We also got these new mascots, C and N, these guys in costumes who did out shows. They don't have much of a presence, again this was around the time where cable was moving away from stuff like that, but I like them. Dare I say, I find them a tad underrated.
Heads up, boss man!
I will say that the block started to suffer a lot around this time. You Are Here and Har Har Thursdays were ended for the much more generic Night of Action and Monday nights. Yeah, comedies were on Mondays now, which hey, made more sense than Thursdays, I guess. But these boxes didn't have a lot of personality when it came to presentation. But what they lacked in presentation they made up for in content, because in an attempt to revitalize life into the network after 2009, Cartoon Network premiered 9 new series in 2010, both original and acquired. We already talked about Adventure Time, but what about the others? We'll start with the comedies. We had Regular Show, following the adventures of 2 slacker park employees, Mordecai and Rigby, who managed to turn even simple tasks into life-threatening disasters. Another great series, one of Cartoon Network's best. I think what made this show work was just how relatable it was, taking small problems that most people have experienced and blowing them up to the nth degree in the last 3 or 4 minutes, creating a nice contrast. The characters were all really memorable as well, each being distinct and allowing for great character dynamics. The regular show was much more episodic than Adventure Time. I really appreciate the subtle forms of character development that the series goes through over its run. Like at the start of the show, Mordecai and Rigby are new to the park, and most of their fellow employees are either completely indifferent towards them or actively dislike them due to the wanton destruction they end up causing. But as the show goes on, they really grow to feel like real friends. And the change is subtle to the point where it's honestly hard to notice until you're looking back at the series in hindsight. The show also carried over some of the more adult edge that Adventure Time had, honestly probably pushing the standards even more. Like, I'm shocked how much they were able to get away with.
Takes more than expired soda to have a party. It takes guests with breasts, and mine don't count.
They just show characters carrying guns and stuff so often, I love it. While Kate could obviously enjoy the show, I feel like the show was always geared a bit more towards young adults, with the cast consisting mostly of 20-somethings and humor revolving around more adulting issues. I admit that regular show is a very formulaic series. Sometimes the show's more mean-spirited humor can be a bit much, and like Adventure Time, regular show's romantic subplots could drag a bit too long. But for as weird as it can get, when you look past it all, what regular show is basically just a workplace sitcom, and as a workplace sitcom, I think it's one of the best. I mean, come on, the show gave us Muscle Man, one of the greatest characters in fiction. While Adventure Time was clearly Cartoon Network's #1 show, regular show still had a very respectable second place, and I think these two series complemented each other well. We also got Mad, a sketch comedy show based on the popular magazine series. Mad can be described as Robot Chicken for kids. Well, younger kids. With the sketches usually parodying or mashing up at the time relevant pieces of pop culture, which given that the series debuted in 2010 means mostly Twilight, Avatar, and Justin Bieber jokes. The show could be pretty hit or miss, and honestly it probably did miss more than it hit. Well, the sketches felt like they just came up with the title first and the sketch second. And the animation, while sometimes looking pretty varied and unique, often uses cheap paper cutout style that never really looked that appealing to me. But the show could be funny at points, and it can be kind of fun to look back on the show just to see how much of a time capsule it is. We also had Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated, the newest Scooby-Doo series, this time taking on a darker tone, dealing with an ongoing mystery that develops episode to episode. This was the only Scooby-Doo series I ever actively watched, and it's a pretty good time, often considered by fans to be one of, if not the best Scooby-Doo iterations. I like how creative but generally creepy most of the monsters are, and the way the series focuses more on the teenage aspect of the characters, putting them in high school and showing them deal with things like relationships and stuff like that. However, I do feel like the show has a bit of a tonal issue. When the show is dark, it's kind of hard to take seriously because it's a Scooby-Doo series. But when the show is silly and more on par with what you expect from a Scooby-Doo series, it feels kind of out of place because of how dark things were previously. But still, a fun and unique take on the Scooby-Doo franchise. We also got Robotomy, one of Cartoon Network's shortest-lived and most obscure series, following two robot teenagers, Thrasher and Blastus, trying to navigate adolescence. The show came from a lot of the people who worked on Super Jail. It contains similar amounts of destruction and violence, but since it's robots, I guess it's okay, you know, Samurai Jack rules. I haven't seen this show in years. It's another one of those short-lived shows the Cartoon Network doesn't like to rerun or put on streaming, but I remember liking this series, but I also don't remember it doing anything that special. While it was obviously unintentional, the main duo here have a lot of similarities to Mordecai and Rigby personality-wise, so perhaps it was the best that the show didn't last that long, as having both shows running may have made the lineup feel a bit samey. We also got Total Drama World Tour, the third season of the Total Drama franchise, with the gimmick this time being that episodes take place in different countries a la The Amazing Race. Also, the show's a musical now, which does kind of feel a bit immersion breaking. Total Drama, while exaggerated, started out fairly grounded early on, but as time went on it just became more and more cartoony. But I can forgive it because most of these songs slap. It can have some really creative visuals. World Tour was definitely an improvement over action. The returning cast was more of a mix between well-developed and lesser-known characters. We also got a new villain in the form of Alejandro, who was basically what Justin was supposed to be until the writers decided to give up halfway through. And while we still have reward challenges mixed with elimination challenges, they were done at random, so you never knew which episode had an elimination or not, which helped raise the stakes. Also, I think the Around the World premise is probably the most creative premise yet. The season wasn't as good as Island, the writing, while still better than action, still wasn't quite there in my opinion. A lot of the characters still felt pretty flanderized, but it was a step in the right direction. Though this did mark a change in the series, as while Total Drama used to easily be Cartoon Network's #1 show, with the inclusion of Adventure Time and regular show, it had now shifted to a distant third place. Still commendable, but it was a sign that the network was starting to change. Over on the action front, we got Ben 10 Ultimate Alien, the third Ben 10 series, being pretty similar to Alien Force, but with Ben gaining access to the ultimate forms of his aliens that you can buy at a Toys R Us near you. And for the same team, we got Generator Rex, about a kid named Rex who got affected with nanobots, allowing him to transform into various weapons. I never watched this one, but I can tell it's pretty fondly remembered, though never reaching the same level of success as the Ben 10 series did. We also have Symbiotic Titan, co-created by Genndy Tartakovsky, following two aliens and their robot being trapped on Earth and having to pretend to be normal high schoolers while protecting the planet from giant kaiju with their titular Symbiotic Titan. Never saw this one either, but I hear it's great, containing a lot of Genndy's typical tropes while also being more serialized and dialogue driven, allowing the series to stand out. Unfortunately, this was the case of the show being screwed over by the network, as Cartoon Network was only interested in the series if they could get a toy deal, which they could not. Action shows are often more merchandise driven than more comedic shows due to their usually higher budgets, so when it becomes clear that toys weren't happening, Cartoon Network started moving Symbiotic Titan around the schedule, moving it from Friday nights to Wednesdays after CN Real to Saturday mornings, basically guaranteeing that no one could keep up with it. And the show ended after 20 episodes without being able to finish its story. Man, you know things are rough when even Genndy isn't able to get a second season. And that was Cartoon Network's output in 2010. And talk about a course correction. Sure, not all the shows are great, and live action still had a decent presence on the channel. This was also the year where Adult Swim expanded an hour starting at 9 Eastern Time as opposed to 10. But Stu Snyder really seemed to turn things around fast. And granted, I'm sure that some of these shows were probably intended to air in 2009 and just got delayed. But after 2009 caused a lot of Cartoon Network fans to start to question their loyalty, 2010 came in and won them all back. And Cartoon Network continued this direction in the following years. We had The Amazing World of Gumball, about a cat named Gumball and his adopted goldfish brother Darwin going on misadventures in the town of Elmore. The show was actually made by Cartoon Network's European division, being made in the UK, though you could hardly tell. This is another really great series. I love the way the show looks, taking on this mixed media art style. The show can also be really funny. I admit the first season is just kind of okay. It felt like it took a little bit for the series to really find its voice. I feel like if I had to compare the show to anything, it would be early Simpsons. And that's not a bad thing at all. I admit the show can sometimes be a bit too mean-spirited for my taste at times. Like, seriously, I have no idea why the show is rated Y7. This is a PG show all the way. The show can also rely a little bit too much on meta-comedy. They used it a bit early on, but I think once the crew really started to see people respond well to it online, they started to rely on it a bit too much. But overall, another really good series, another one of Cartoon Network's best. The show felt a little bit overshadowed by Adventure Time regular show's success early on, but as time went on, its popularity only grew, slowly over the years becoming a bigger and bigger hit for the network. You also had the Looney Tunes show, taking the Looney Tunes cast and transplanting them into a suburban setting. The show was less slapstick and more of a sitcom, following Bugs and Daffy as roommates slash possible gay lovers. This reboot was pretty controversial when it premiered, with die-hard Looney Tunes fans thinking it strayed too far from the source material. Which, to be fair, they weren't wrong. But I've never been that huge of a Looney Tunes fan, and grew up on a lot of Nick at Night, so the show was right up my alley. The show is just funny, plain and simple. Bugs works really well as a comedic straight man, and this is probably the most iconic version of Daffy there is. And when you add other characters like Porky, Speedy, Lola Bunny, and Yosemite Sam into the mix, it just makes it all the better. This is my favorite incarnation of the Looney Tunes. I don't care. Man, we need to bring back this era of Cartoon Network where shows were just allowed to have blatant gun use.
Know your role!
We also got The Problem Solvers, following Horace, Alfie, and Roba trying to go around and solve people's problems, like a cross between Smiling Friends and a Seeing Eye Test. Yeah, this show definitely has a unique art style, though I do feel it's a bit, I don't know, much. It's not very appealing, and while I don't struggle with it, I could genuinely see the show giving someone a migraine. And the art style is probably the most interesting part of the show, because outside of that, there's just not much to it. All the characters are either boring, unlikable, or both. You know, the show was originally pitched to Adult Swim, and honestly, while I don't think it would have done that much better there, I feel like the show could have gained a bit of an audience amongst the stoner crowd. But on CN, the show was a flop, with the second season not even airing on the channel, instead being dumped on Netflix, a first for the channel. And then Netflix removed it too. There was Secret Mountain Fort Awesome, about a bunch of frat boy monsters trying to fit into human society. While not as bad as Problem Solvers, the show just felt kind of unremarkable and didn't last very long. We also had... Okay, look. I watched Annoying Orange as a kid. Yeah, I was one of those. I wasn't a die-hard fan or anything, but I think the original YouTube shorts were... fine. But But the early 2010s was around the time where traditional media was really starting to take notice of YouTube and its success. Nickelodeon gave Fred a show, so Cartoon Network was probably thinking they should try something similar. The series just didn't work in my opinion. What works in a 5-minute YouTube short doesn't always translate to an 11-minute series. And when those 5-minute shorts already aren't the greatest to begin with, it just feels like a recipe for disaster. We also got told drama Revenge of the Island, featuring a whole new cast in a shorter run, being only 13 episodes instead of 26. A format the series would be using going forward. The gimmick this time being that it took place on a radioactive version of the island from season 1. This season just wasn't my favorite. It's pretty clear in hindsight to see why the Total Drama franchise just reused characters from the previous seasons up until this point, because they had already used all the good teenage stereotypes. Most of the cast here were either uninteresting or just felt like knockoff versions of characters we had already seen before, though there were a few standouts. Total Drama Action was more frustrating since it was coming off the back of Island, but this season was just boring. This had also been the longest gap we had gotten between Total Drama seasons thus far, as the season had been delayed in order to distance itself from the nuclear accidents that occurred in Japan in 2011. So by the time that the season came out, it was clear that Total Drama was no longer as big of a deal in the eyes of Cartoon Network, and the season was not given as much screen time as a result. The empire was beginning to crumble. We also got a fair amount on the action front, like Lego Ninjago following a group of teen ninjas doing battle against the evil Lord Garmadon. I never watched this series much, but I heard it's actually pretty good, having a pretty serious story for a Lego tie-in, with the show airing for 16 seasons and 215 episodes? I sort of get the feeling the show was partially aired out of corporate obligation. They aired it a lot at first, but after a while the reruns stopped and the show would only come back whenever there was a new season, with the later seasons not even airing on Cartoon Network. There was Dragons Riders of Berk, based on the How to Train Your Dragons film series. And we also got a new Thundercats reboot, taking on a more anime-inspired art style and dramatic story. This was another series I didn't watch, but I've heard nothing but positive things about it. Though like Symbiotic Titan, the show had trouble with its toy line, which they had but it flopped, resulting in the series having an unfortunately short run. We also got a new Ben 10 series, Ben 10 Omniverse. This series attempted to return to the later and more comedic tone of the original series, which had always been the most popular sales-wise, forgoing Gwen and Kevin and giving Ben a new partner, Rook, and featuring flashbacks to a younger Ben, filling the gaps between the original series and Alien Force. However, I don't think this soft reboot really did what Cartoon Network wanted to do. I mean, this is your 4th Ben 10 show, there's only so much you can do to make it more accessible to newcomers. We also got the launch of a brand new block, DC Nation, designed to air shows based on DC Comics, featuring original shorts between the episodes following different DC comic characters. These shorts were sort of hit and miss. The big problem was that these shorts were too short, usually only being a minute long, so they didn't really have much time to breathe. But even so, there were definitely some highlights. New Teen Titans was a series of shorts based on the 2003 Teen Titans series, which was really cool to see given how long it had been since that show had ended. You had DC's Super Best Friends Forever, created by My Little Pony Friendship is Magic creator Lauren Faust, following Supergirl, Batgirl, and Wonder Girl going on wacky misadventures. Amethyst Princess of Gemworld was another good one, taking on this neat magical girl art style. And Batman of Shanghai is one that really stuck out to me due to being such a visual treat for the eyes. But how are the actual shows? We got Green Lantern, the animated series, which was a really good show, even if the CGI was a little rough around the edges. We also had Young Justice. The series followed a very similar premise to Teen Titans, following a team of teenage superheroes battling a mysterious villainous organization known as the Light. However, outside the premise and a couple of characters, that's where the similarities end, as Young Justice was a much grittier, down-to-earth, and more serialized take on the DC universe, often incorporating a larger cast of more recognizable DC characters as opposed to the goofier and more comedic Teen Titans, to try to keep outside DC references to a minimum. One style isn't inherently better than the other, it all comes down to personal preference, and I think by going in such a drastically different direction, it allowed Young Justice to stand out on its own a lot more. And while I do think I prefer Teen Titans a bit more, Young Justice is still a really good series, and it had a big influence on me, being my gateway into the DC universe as a whole. There was also Beware the Batman, an attempt to return Batman to his more noir-inspired roots. This show was okay. It was good for what it was, though I do feel it struggled a bit in trying to find its own identity, making some pretty drastic changes in attempt to stand out, like featuring more obscure villains and having Batman work alongside not a Robin or a Batgirl, but Katana. But despite these changes, it was still pretty much just another Batman show, but still good based on what I saw, though I didn't really see all that much, because DC Nation shows were not treated very well by the network. For one, the block aired at 10 AM on Saturday mornings, which is pretty early considering that most of Cartoon Network's other shows premiered at prime time, The DC Nation programming generally skewed a bit older than Cartoon Network's typical programming anyway. None of the DC Nation shows ever re-ran outside the block, and the show was frequently put on hiatus without warning, which made the shows even harder to keep track of. Not to mention that most of these shows either couldn't get a toy deal or had toys formed poorly. What do you mean you don't want an action figure of this? It all added up to these shows not lasting very long. Green Lantern only got 1 season, Young Justice got 2, though it did eventually get revived for streaming, and Beware the Batman only aired 7 of its 26 episodes before the series was pulled, eventually being rescued by Adult Swim's Toonami block and finishing up its run. Barely. They had to do a marathon to finish the series because they lost the rights to air it. My god, what did this show do to hurt you? It was clear that Cartoon Network was moving away from action programming around this time, which honestly was probably one of the worst aspects of Cartoon Network during this era. Action shows had always been part of the channel's DNA, but the action shows often relied heavily on merch, and with kids being more interested in iPads and action figures, it was no wonder why these shows were beginning to flop. But I don't think Cartoon Network is entirely blameless here either. They barely advertised these shows, quickly moved them around the schedule, and never reran them. Of course the toys weren't gonna sell. And when some of these shows didn't even have toys to begin with, like, what do you think was gonna happen? I'm no business executive, but given how many of these action shows tended to skew older, I feel like Cartoon Network should have tried to find other ways to monetize these series beyond just kids' toys. Know your audience and try to market the series to them. But alas, many action shows ended at this point, and from this point on, action shows would become rarer for the network, as the channel focused more on comedies. Live action shows were still around, but nowhere near as much. We got Tower Prep, Cartoon Network's first scripted series since Out of Jimmy's Head, and you know, while I never watched this show, I've heard some people say that it actually wasn't that bad. It was created by Paul Dini? Like, Batman the Animated Series Paul Dini? Okay. We also had Level Up, following a group of epic gamers fighting video game monsters who entered the real world. There was Incredible Crew, a sketch comedy series that's main claim to fame was that they somehow managed to rope Finn from Adventure Time's voice actor into it. And we had Hole in the Wall, a game show about people trying to fit into specifically shaped holes to avoid being pushed into a pool of water. This was a Fox show. We also had the Hall of Game Awards, a sports award show that Cartoon Network aired for some reason. Sort of like their version of the Kids' Choice Awards, but Cartoon Network didn't really have any connection to sports, which is why it was no surprise that this award show only lasted 2 years.
And here to present it, one of the stars of iCarly, Nathan Kress!
This is around the time where live-action programming stopped airing regularly on the network. It was clear at this point that live action just wasn't what Cartoon Network's audience was interested in, no matter how hard the executives tried to push it. And I'm glad that after this, the channel decided to stick with what they were best at. Around this time, Cartoon Network was also celebrating their 20th anniversary, and they definitely did it in style, with this big year-long celebration with new bumpers showing characters old and new interacting with each other, online polls allowing fans to vote for what shows they wanted to see, and the unveiling of a new block, Cartoon Planet, dedicated to airing 1 hour of classic Cartoon Network programming every Friday night. The block even had bumpers hosted by Brack and Zorak from Space Ghosts. I like that. All this led up to the day itself, where they had a huge marathon of birthday-themed episodes from Cartoon Network's past and present, ended with this fantastic music video showing many of their characters. I already made a whole video talking about Cartoon Network's 20th anniversary, so I recommend you watch that if you want to see me talk about it more in detail. Cartoon Network really pulled out all the stops here, making their anniversary really feel like something special. The early 2010s was definitely an interesting time to be a Cartoon Network fan. Sure, a lot of the shows were a bit hit or miss, but when the hits were as good as they were, it could be hard to complain. But as the 20th anniversary ended and we moved into 2013, we began to see a bit of a shift in the network's direction. And like how Adventure Time defined Cartoon Network's success in the early 2010s, we would see the rise of a new show that would define the channel's path for the decade forward. And that show would be none other than In 2013, we got the premiere of Teen Titans Go, a purely comedic adaptation of the 2003 Teen Titans series. Yeah, remember those DC Nation shorts? This is what those shorts led to. Though those shorts in this show are an entirely different beast. I just don't think that a purely comedic take on the Teen Titans series was something anyone really asked for, especially around this time where so many action shows were being kicked to the curb. The original series was already comedic in a lot of ways, and when you consider that many people wanted to see a proper continuation of the Teen Titans series to resolve some of the loose ends that the series left hanging, the idea behind the series just seems really weird and unnecessary, leading to a lot of fan backlash. But who knows, perhaps people were being too harsh. I mean, the original Teen Titans series didn't get the warmest reception when it first came out to the scene, and it was able to prove itself. So maybe this show would go on to do the same and be able to stand on its own and be good in its own right. It wasn't. Teen Titans Go is just an awful series, both from an adaptation standpoint and as its own thing. The characters in comedy are all dumbed down, everyone is super unlikable, and all the characters are written basically as the exact same half the time, killing any of the fun that came from the characters' wildly different personalities bouncing off each other. The animation is beyond cheap, constantly reusing frames and using stock PNG backgrounds half the time. The voice cast all return, but actually works to the series' detriment because A, it makes it all that hard to disconnect this series from the original and see it as its own thing, and B, because every single side character who wasn't part of the original series is also voiced by one of the same 5 actors, which is super distracting, especially when a lot of these actors don't have the best range.
Man, you a nerd if you don't want to do the graffiti on walls. Come on, other cool rollerblading dudes, let's blade out.
The show is mindlessly repetitive. Every episode is either just about the Titans getting food or appealing to some kind of niche fetish. Nothing happens in this show. The characters don't do anything. Half of the show is just them sitting on this one couch. It feels like the characters just phoning it in, not the cast or the crew, the fictional characters themselves. The show isn't just bad, it's spiteful. There are entire episodes designed to mock the detractors of the show. I'm not just talking about 1 or 2, I'm talking about dozens. This show hates you just as much, if not more, than you hate it. I know some people defend this series, saying it gets too much hate, and if you like this show, that's great, more power to you. But I do not. The show can sometimes be funny in a so bad it's good kind of way, and there are even some moments where the show is genuinely good, but to get to those moments you have to sit through so much nothing. It's far from the worst show Cartoon Network has aired, but that by no means makes it good. But this show, despite how hated it was online, was a massive hit for the network, becoming the #1 show almost instantaneously. And after Teen Titans Go premiered, it started to take up more and more of the channel's schedule, as Adventure Time and regular show began to appear less and less. Cartoon Network aired this show so much. Also Gumball, but mostly Teen Titans Go. You couldn't escape it. Don't watch just wasn't an option unless you just stop watching the channel altogether. Teen Titans Go became to Cartoon Network what SpongeBob was for Nickelodeon. Anytime a new show came out that wasn't some kind of instant hit, well, drop its reruns and give it to Teen Titans Go. I think this hurt a lot of Cartoon Network shows going forward. It just aired way too much, and I would be saying this regardless of the series' quality. But the fact that the series was bad definitely didn't help. Though that didn't mean we didn't get any good series after this point, we most certainly did, even if they didn't always rerun much. And one of those series was Steven Universe. Created by Rebecca Sugar, who worked on some of the best episodes of Adventure Time. Steven Universe follows a boy named Steven being raised by a group of magical alien warriors known as the Crystal Gems. We follow Steve as he learns to become part of this team while learning to control his own gem powers, as he is the half-gem son of their former leader, Rose Quartz. There was a time where Steven Universe was nearly universally loved by people online, though as time went on, people's opinion on the show began to become a lot more divisive. Let's start with the good. I really like the character of Steven himself, starting off as this dorky little idiot, but slowly over time becoming more and more competent and mature. Honestly, I think this might be my favorite part of the series. Comparing Steven at the beginning of the show to the end of the show, it's like night and day, but in a way that feels earned. The other characters are also pretty good for the most part, having their own backstories and depth that is revealed to the audience as time goes on. The show also has some of the nicest coloring and soundtrack I've seen in any animated series, giving the show a nice relaxing feel between all the action and adventure. The show does have its drawbacks. I don't want to go into spoilers, but there's this twist revealed near the end of the series that kind of recontextualizes a lot of what happened previously, and it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. The series can be a bit repetitive with its reliance on having villains go through redemption arcs, and the show's pacing can be really wonky, with tons of slice-of-life filler episodes that are usually not very interesting and interrupt the flow of the story. I have a complicated relationship with this series, and I definitely think that the show is a bit of a mixed bag. I think the good way outweighs the bad here. And that's not even getting to how much the series paved the way for LGBT+ representation on Cartoon Network and in kid media in general. Steven Universe still stands as one of Cartoon Network's best series, despite its many issues. We also got Uncle Grandpa. That's right, first bestiality, now we got incest. Cartoon Network just keeps pushing the envelope. Created by Pete Browngarth, the creator of Secret Battle Fort Awesome, Uncle Grandpa follows the titular Uncle Grandpa as he travels around the world in his magical RV helping different children with their problems, alongside his wacky assortment of cartoon pals. The show wasn't outright bad, but was just kind of boring to me. Oftentimes just feeling random for the sake of being random. And and Uncle Grandpa himself just isn't the most interesting character, being your typical hapless idiot. Early on, I kinda liked how they played around with the idea that maybe Uncle Grandpa was smarter than he seems, as his dumb escapades did always end up teaching the kids he helped a lesson by the end, leaving it kind of ambiguous if his actions were all on purpose or not. But then we see episodes where he isn't helping kids and it's like, no, he's just an idiot. Cartoon Network also really tried to push this show for some reason. Like, there was a time where Uncle Grandpa was the borderline mascot for Cartoon Network. And I'm just like, why this show of all shows? I mean, the creator's last show was a pretty big bomb. I was never crazy about this one, but the show wasn't all bad. It could be funny at times. And the show even had a crossover with Steven Universe, and one of the best episodes of either show. It's so stupid, I love it. We also got Clarence. Oh boy, you know it's not a party until Clarence shows up. Clarence follows a young boy named Clarence, just going around normal life alongside his neurotic and orderly friend Jeff and his chaotic and rebellious friend Sumo. Around this time, we weren't really getting all that many grounded, down-to-earth series on the network, so it was nice seeing something a little different. As for the show itself, it's... how do I describe Clarence? The show was freaking broken. I mean that in the best way. This just sort of happened in the show without much rhyme or reason. It felt like the crew were just throwing ideas at the wall because they thought they were funny. The show has this sort of unnerving vibe to it that's kind of hard to articulate, but I also kind of like the show for the same reason. It gives the series character. I admit I'm not a die-hard fan of the show. I sort of feel like Clarence himself is kind of too weird to form an attachment to as a main character. It would sort of be like if Ed was the leader and Ed and Eddie instead of Eddie. But I do enjoy this show. I completely understand why it gained the cult classic status it has. Cartoon Network also started doing mini-series around this time, short-form series designed from the gate for a limited run, with their first being Over the Garden Wall.
Someone cooked here.
This show is incredible. There's no other words to describe it. Over the Garden Wall follows half-brothers Wirt and Greg as they are transported to a mysterious world known as the Unknown and have to find their way back home, all while being guided by a talking bluebird named Beatrice, and being tailed by a mysterious being known simply as the Beast. Over the Garden Wall is one of my favorite animated series of all time. It's that good. The characters, all amazing. The voice acting, fantastic. With a top-notch cast featuring a lot of people who are known more for live-action work, which I think adds to the series' more grounded tone. The world building is amazing, as the show finds a perfect way to make the Unknown look both cozy and threatening. This is easily one of Cartoon Network's darkest series. Like, I'm shocked with some of the stuff they were able to get away with. But the series never goes too dark. There's still a sense of whimsy in the world. Something I really love about the show is how much of the lore isn't explained to you, perfectly capturing the vibe of those old grim fairy tales, which was obviously a big influence on the series. The animation, gorgeous, perfectly capturing that autumn vibe. The soundtrack, beautiful to listen to. I love this show. And when I think of what Cartoon Network is capable at their best, this is always the show that I think of first. I'm not sure if I'd say it's my favorite series from them. I say it and Space Ghost are about a tie. Apples and oranges, I know. But while Space Ghost Coast to Coast is an acquired taste that I don't think would be everyone's thing, this is a show that I can recommend to anyone with an interest in animation. Wait till fall rolls around and the weather gets cold, and enter the unknown. We also got Long Live the Royals, another mini-series. Coming off the back of Over the Garden Wall definitely didn't do the show any favors. The series follows a royal family trying to prepare for the Yule Hair Festival, with each of the 4 episodes focusing on a different member of the family. While Over the Garden Wall felt like a complete narrative, this series just feels like a 4-part pilot for a show that would never come out. The show isn't bad, but it isn't particularly interesting either. Everything from the characters to the jokes just feels very standard, and I could see why this show became one of Cartoon Network's most obscure series. We also got 2 new Total Drama seasons, Total Drama All-Stars and Total Drama Pocket Tail Island, which I'm lumping together because they only aired 6 months apart. Total Drama All-Stars features a returning cast of characters from the OG series and Revenge, paired together into heroes versus villains. You know, most people say that Total Drama All-Stars is the worst season of the entire series, and I haven't seen the series since it came out, so they're probably right, but I remember not hating it. I admit my standards for Total Drama were pretty low at this point, but I don't know, the idea of having multiple villains, all scheming and trying to manipulate each other was interesting, and I like seeing the OG cast and the Revenge of the Island cast interact with each other. But I don't know, there's a good chance the season might be worse than I remember. Pocket Tail was also pretty decent, taking place on an island again, but this time, it's a different island. Ooh. It features a whole new cast just like Revenge, and yeah, some of them are pretty lame, but but I kinda like this cast a bit more. We got multiple villains this time around, only instead of them all scheming against each other, it was more arc-based. Just as one villain got voted off, a new one would step in to fill their role. Neither of these seasons were great, but they weren't the worst thing ever. But in 2014, Cartoon Network went through some more big changes. Adult Swim would expand by another hour, now starting at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. But more importantly, Stu Snyder would be stepping down as Cartoon Network president due to creative differences with the higher-ups. Stu Snyder has an interesting reputation, probably due to running Cartoon Network for the longest out of any president. He seems to be a very loved or hated figure, and it's easy to see why. On one hand, he created CN Real, saw the end of Toonami and action shows in general for that matter, and a lot of the new cartoons he made weren't the greatest. But on the other hand, his tenure gave us Chowder, Flapjack, Total Drama, Adventure Time, Regular Show, Gumball, Steven Universe, Over the Garden Wall, and many, many more. If there was one word I would use to describe Stu Snyder's reign as Cartoon Network president, it would be experimental. And experimentation is what Cartoon Network is all about. He was willing to try anything, pushing the channel out of its comfort zone. And when you're willing to throw anything at the wall to see what sticks, you're gonna have a few misses, which his tenure definitely had. His time at Cartoon Network president wasn't perfect, but it was almost always interesting. Stu Snyder would be replaced by Christina Miller, who had been working at various roles at Turner for several years at this point. How would her tenure be? Well, let's take a look. Once Christina Miller took over the channel, she actually kept the Checkered Era around for a little while, but eventually Cartoon Network would get a new facelift to symbolize the new direction the channel would be taking with the Dimensional Era. It wasn't really that different from the Checkered Era aesthetically. Checkered Era itself had several rebrands during its run, so it kind of feels like it slowly evolved into this new look, as opposed to being a drastic change in direction. The most distinct about this would be the frequent use of the CMYK color palette. Though even then, the bumpers were already sort of heading in that direction by the end of Snyder's tenure anyway. One of the first big changes for this era was the fact that comedies went from airing on Monday nights back to Thursday night. Sure, why not? I don't care at this point. The block didn't really have much of a personality, often changing names and branding on a dime. First it was called New Thursdays, then Yours Days, eventually became New Titans Thursdays, where it would alternate between new episodes and Teen Titan Go reruns because why should I be happy? But enough about the block, how were the actual shows? We got We Bare Bears, a Stu Snyder holdover, but I associate more with the Miller era, due to the fact that it didn't premiere until a year after Stu Snyder had left the company. We Bare Bears follows three bear brothers, Grizzly, Panda, and Ice Bear, trying to fit into human society while living in the San Francisco Bay Area. Quaint is the word I would use to describe this show. It's not laugh out loud funny a lot of the time, but it has a friendly and cozy atmosphere that I find really enjoyable. And as someone who's in the process of moving into an apartment with my brothers, I found the series to be very relatable. The show was pretty popular in the US, but it was way bigger in overseas markets, especially Asia, making the series a pretty big hit for the network. We have Mighty Magiswords following brother and sister Prohyas and Vamber, going around completing quests in an attempt to find magical swords. This show has a real Dave the Barbarian vibe to it, though admittedly not as good as that show. One thing that really holds the show back for me is the pacing. It's just way too fast. Nothing is giving a chance to breathe, and it becomes actually hard to follow at points. I heard this issue improves in the second season, but I dropped the show before that happened. We also got some of our first Cartoon Network original reboots around this time. We got the Powerpuff Girls 2016, a reboot of the original Powerpuff Girls series made without the involvement of Craig McCracken or any of the original voice actresses. To say this show was hated would be an understatement. This show was despised by people online due to the show's later and more comedic tone, softer art style, removal of fan-favorite characters, and the fact that it referenced a meme once or twice. With it going down, it's probably the most universally hated series Cartoon Network has ever produced. I thought it was aight. Like, the show isn't great, and it is a significant downgrade from the original for many of the reasons I just listed, but it's not that bad. I actually like how the series went in a different direction. I like the way the series reimagined some of the characters, like making Blossom more neurotic, Bubbles more ditzy, and Buttercup more mischievous. While I'm not a big fan of the softer art style, I think the lighting and coloring can look really good at times. I don't know. I made a whole video going over this series, so I recommend you watch that if you want to hear my thoughts in greater detail. The show's nothing that special, which is bad when you're based on such a beloved series, but if you're going to reboot a series, I'd rather see something different than just a rehash of what came before. It's not that bad, guys. Come on! We also got a new Ben 10 series, this time not a continuation, but a full-on reboot, also taking on a lighter and more comedic approach. I watched a few episodes when it came out, thinking this would be my chance to finally get into the Ben 10 series, but it just didn't grab me, and I think reception from fans was pretty lukewarm at best. Both this and Powerpuff Girls didn't last very long on the channel in terms of reruns, being replaced by Guess who? However, due to merch sales and the fact that these series had a much larger presence in the overseas territories, both still had a decently sized run, and in a lot of foreign markets, these shows are still getting reruns on the channel to this day. We also had OK KO Let's Be Heroes, about a fun-loving kid named KO working at a bodega for superpowered individuals, hoping to one day become a great hero himself. I really like the premise of this one, and the world they create being inspired by shonen anime and retro video games opened up lots of possibilities. However, I couldn't really get into this series' tone. The show has a really goofy sense of humor, but also a serialized story. I feel like these aspects just kind of clashed. I mean, the evil shadowy figure we see throughout the show is literally called Shadowy Figure. That's fine as a joke, but I'm not gonna take that seriously. The show is also really reference heavy, and references can be fine in small doses, but I feel like there's a line between making a reference and just ripping something off.
You're being fired. Out of a cannon, into the sun.
Then you'll be fired.
Fine.
Out of a cannon into the sun.
But I don't want to be too hard on the show. I know it has a very devoted fan base, and it's not like the show is awful or anything. And to be fair, I've only seen the first season, and I hear people say that the later seasons do improve a bit. There's Craig of the Creek, a show about a young and adventurous boy named Craig and his friends Kelsey and JP exploring the creek, a vibrant society run entirely by kids. When the show came out, I was kind of turned off by just how, I don't know, safe it felt. Like, whenever I watched the show, I never thought these kids were ever at risk of dying or being attacked by a child molester or something. I always felt that way watching something like Clarence, so I dropped the show after a few episodes. I've seen some more here and there, and honestly, I don't mind what I saw. It's fun and charming, and my younger brother watches the show and says it's pretty good, so maybe one day I'll go and give it another look. We got Apple and Onion from Cartoon Network's European division, following two friends Apple and Onion going on adventures while trying to navigate living on their own for the first time. I haven't seen much of this one, but from what I've seen, it didn't really grab me. Felt like the same two optimistic dude bros who rap and annoy everyone around them formula we've seen a lot in other shows. The show's drier and more deadpan delivery does make it stand out a little bit. The show was made in the UK, just like Gumball, but while Gumball could honestly be pretty easily mistaken as an American series, Apple and Onion has a lot more of that British humor. But from what little I've seen, I don't think Apple and Onion is really my thing. There's also Summer Camp Island, about best friends Hedgehog and Oscar, who attend a magical summer camp run by witches. You'd think this would be the standard Harry Potter type fare with the two learning how to use magic themselves, but no, the series just seems to involve them doing normal camp stuff, just with magic. I didn't watch the series as it aired due to my family losing cable around this time, but I did check out a couple of episodes in preparation for this review. The series has a really laid back tone, and I find the pastel color palette and actual child voice actors to be really charming. Though the show does feel noticeably kiddier than what Cartoon Network normally produces, at least for the little bits I've seen, so that might be a turnoff for some people. The way the show was released was really weird, with the whole first season airing as a marathon for 2 days straight. I guess Cartoon Network was trying to see if the binge model could work for cable, which it clearly didn't because when season 2 came around they just ended up airing it like any other series. I admit I haven't seen much of this show, and while from what little I've seen it doesn't seem like Summer Camp Island really does anything that groundbreaking, it's still a charming, cozy little show that I think would be really nice to fall asleep to. And now for some shows I haven't seen at all. We have Victor and Valentino, about two half-brothers dealing with supernatural occurrences in a small Mexican town. From what I gather, people's perception of the show seems to be pretty meh. But it's neat seeing a show focus on Mexican and South American mythology. You have Mau Mau, Legends of Pure Heart, about an egotistical cat warrior trying to protect a valley. I've seen a lot of praise for this one. You have Elliot of Earth, another European show about a kid living on a space station full of aliens. However, while there are many shows this era I wasn't able to watch due to my family's lack of cable, there was one I knew I had to check out. And that show was Infinity Train. Created by Owen Dennis from, you know, I wouldn't have guessed. Infinity Train felt totally different from everything else Cartoon Network was airing at the time. An anthology series where each season focused on a new character boarding the Infinity Train, a magical train designed to help people get over their trauma. The show already had a fun and interesting premise that lended itself to near endless possibilities, but on top of that the writing felt so adult and mature. Feeling like a show you'd see from the Snyder era as opposed to the Miller era, this show goes to some dark place at that point. Like, I would go as far as to say that this is Cartoon Network's darkest show, which I feel is a bit of a double-edged sword. On one hand, I like the darker approach to the storytelling, as it allows the series to tackle a lot of serious topics without sugarcoating it, as well as gives the series a consistent sense of stakes. But on the other hand, I don't know. I feel like a lot of these darker moments do kind of take away from a lot of the whimsy that I feel like a premise like this needs to have. A lot of people got mad when Cartoon Network ended the series after its 4th season, but to be honest, I get it. Like, don't get me wrong, I absolutely love this show, but Cartoon Network is a kids channel at the end of the day. I totally get why the show probably didn't appeal to a child audience, especially with the 5th season supposedly following a woman dealing with grief after losing her husband. Like, What kid's gonna be able to relate to that? But still, despite the issues, this is still a really good series. One that I would rank among some of Cartoon Network's greats, and I admire Cartoon Network's willingness to return to these darker, more serialized fantasy series. We continue to got plenty of licensed shows, of course. We got Wabbit, a new Looney Tunes adaptation that wanted to return the series to its slapstick roots, featuring Bugs interacting with several original Looney Tunes characters. And we got Be Cool Scooby-Doo, a more comedic take on the Scooby-Doo franchise. I hear people say that the show is actually pretty good, but the art style was definitely a point of contention. It looks more akin to Brickleberry than Scooby-Doo, which turned a lot of fans off, especially coming off the highly acclaimed Mystery Incorporated. Neither of these shows lasted very long on the channel, however, due to not doing as well as Teen Titans Go, and were quickly moved over to Boomerang, which also happened to Sonic Boom, a Sonic the Hedgehog reboot that grew a pretty big cult following due to its more self-aware and sarcastic humor. This show was regulated to an early Saturday morning death slot, so I didn't watch much of it. There was also Lego Unikitty, based on the character from the Lego movie, which I think was pretty well liked, though it also didn't last all too long. We got a regular dose of Total Drama content with Total Drama The Redonkulous Race, a pretty big departure from the regular Total Drama formula. We once again have an around-the-world premise, much like World Tour, but the season does do some things to stand out, like having the cast matched up into teams of 2, and being the first season to have a cast with multiple age groups, not just teens, as well as the return to the 26-episode format we hadn't seen since World Tour. Honestly, I like the change-ups here. And the new cast of characters, while still having their fair share of duds, do have some standouts. Though if I had one big complaint, it would be the fact that Chris isn't in this season, being replaced with this new host, Dawn. Chris was the best part of the Total Drama franchise. It would be one thing if they tried something different, like having a host who wasn't an absolute sadist, but no, Dawn just feels like Diet's Chris, so why even bother replacing him in the first place? But beyond that, the series wasn't actually that bad. It kind of felt like a step in the right direction for the series. I wonder what they're gonna do next. I admit that wasn't on my bingo card. Yeah, so after a few-year gap, Total Drama returned with Total Drama Rama, the most drastic change yet. Forgoing the entire reality show premise and instead reimagining the Total Drama cast as preschoolers going on wild and fantastical adventures. This whole thing just reeks of marketing focus groups to me. Like, how do we introduce Total Drama to a younger audience? I got it! I've barely seen any of this show. I saw a few episodes when me and my family took a vacation to a cabin where we had cable. This show just feels unnerving to me. It gives me Cocomelon vibes. And all the things that made Total Drama as a franchise appealing in the first place just isn't here. And we got some new DC cartoons, like Justice League Action, lighter and more comedic take on the Justice League franchise, but look, this one wasn't all that bad. It still featured plenty of action mixed with the comedy. My biggest problem with the show was, 1, the pacing. With every episode only being 11 minutes, I often felt like the show had to speed through establishing things in order to get to the good stuff, often making the stories feel a bit shallow. And 2, the fact that most of the people who worked on the show worked on Justice League and Justice League Unlimited. And those shows are good, but because the show features so many of the same characters being written by the same people in a very similar way, it caused the show to kind of lack its own identity in a lot of ways, making it almost feel like Justice League Junior. But still, Justice League Action was still a good series, even if Cartera gave it practically no support, with it airing new episodes at 7 AM on Saturday mornings with no reruns, the fate of most Cartoon Network action shows around this time. We also got DC Superhero Girls, created by Lauren Faust. Yeah, the series is really just an expansion of those Super Best Friend shorts that premiered on DC Nation, though this time with the extended cast, and they replaced Wonder Girl with Wonder Woman, as this was part of a toy line. I only watched the hour-long pilot special for this series, it didn't really grab me. My issue was the fact that all the characters here are basically just the main cast from My Little Pony Friendship is Magic again, except they split Fluttershy up into 2 characters. I know it's made by the same person, but I still feel like they could have done more to mix it up. I mean, these characters do have, like, established personalities from the comics and all. Though like Justice League Action, Cartoon didn't really treat this show the best. Reruns were pretty much non-existent, with new episodes airing on Sunday afternoons, where Powerpuff Girls 2016 aired during its final days. It was the girl power show we only keep around to promote a merch line, Power Hour. And hey, do you all know what a Thundercat is? Thundercat Roar was, say it with me, a lighter and more take on the Thundercats franchise. And this was the straw that broke the camel's back.
Can't do it. I can't take this shit no more, man.
People were sick of these later and more comedic reimaginings, and honestly, I can't blame people. We had gotten so many over the last several years, all because the network wanted to recapture the popularity of Teen Titans Go, which is darn because it never actually worked outside of the one time. The show got massive backlash online when it was first announced, which does seem a little unfair because, I mean, it's not like the series was doing anything worse than what all these other series were doing. And watching the show, it's honestly not that bad. I like the way it incorporates and embraces a lot of the more goofier aspects of the original 80s series, and the scenes that actually do have action are pretty well done. Though I admit I found the main character Lionel to be pretty annoying. While the animation is good, I have to agree that I'm not really a fan of the character designs. They're barely recognizable as cats. They don't look like they have much weight to them. The show didn't last very long, only 10 months. I think it was just at the wrong place at the wrong time. Many of the people who worked on the show would later go on to work on Aquaman King of Atlantis for HBO Max, and I enjoyed that show quite a bit. But for Thundercats Roar, the biggest impact the show had was starting up the infamous CalArt style debate. That is its legacy. Cartoon Network also lost the rights to Pokemon around this time, with it going to Disney XD and later Netflix, which is kinda sad to see. Sure, Pokemon had kind of been treated as an afterthought on the channel for years at this point, only airing early in the mornings, but it had been there for so long, and it was such an iconic franchise. Bakugan and Beyblade would leave not long after, finally bringing an end to anime on Cartoon Network. Same thing happened with reruns of Looney Tunes and Tom and Jerry, which also stopped airing, moving over to Boomerang exclusively, finally bringing an end to classic retro programming on the network as well. Things would begin to change though in 2019, as this was the year where AT&T decided to purchase Warner Media in an attempt to break into the entertainment market. As with any big buyout, there are bound to be some corporate shakeups, resulting in Christina Miller stepping down as Cartoon Network president. I'm going to be honest, Christina Miller's era as Cartoon Network president has never really been my favorite. Not saying it was all bad, not by a long shot, but I don't know. Things just felt kind of safe under her. A lot of the shows that came out under her tenure felt more like they were made for kids. That's not automatically a bad thing, but I think I prefer the more experimental style of Stu Snyder more, even if the lows of the Snyder era were much lower. That's not even going to the lack of variety in the scheduling department. Like, the constant Teen Titans Go got really bad around this time, and look, I get it. I can't blame Cartoon Network for following the money. I mean, this show was a massive hit and cheap as heck to make, so of course they were gonna capitalize on it, especially at this time when many people were making the jump from cable to streaming services. But I think Cartoon Network's reliance on Teen Titans Go hurt the channel in the long run. So many shows that could have gone on and grown an audience got shafted right out the gate, just because they weren't as popular as Teen Titans Go was. And I think the channel's reliance on the series hurt Cartoon Network's reputation in the eyes of many older fans. But I don't want to be all negative here, as we still got a lot of fun, creative, and unique shows during this era. It wasn't all bad. Michael O'Lean was hired to act as interim president in 2019. Remember the guy who said that Billy and Mandy was a hateful fart cartoon that was ruining Cartoon Network's brand? Yeah, he's back. To be fair, Michael O'Lean had a long history with Cartoon Network and Adult Swim since 1996, including acting as senior vice president of Cartoon Network as well as being co-creator of Harvey Birdman, and executive producer on Reanimated. Look, we can't all be winners. Michael O'Lean didn't really do much during his time as interim president. You know, interim presidents aren't really there to make major changes, they're mostly there to make sure the animators don't burn the place down. Cartoon Network would soon find its new permanent president in the form of Tom Asham. He had previously worked for TV channels like Noggin and Freeform, and with the change came the obligatory rebrand, the Redraw Your World era. And honestly, I really like these bumps for what they are. They're a bit extra and have some gross looking gradients, but I like how bombastic they look. Tom Ash had a pretty clear goal in mind for what he wanted to do with Cartoon Network. And that was make it a channel that could appeal to everyone. You see, kids nowadays don't watch cable. This has been said by multiple high-ranking people in the kids entertainment industry. Cartoon Network's biggest competitor was no longer Nickelodeon and Disney Channel, it was YouTube and TikTok. This is probably why Cartoon Network aired so much Teen Titans Go during the Miller era. I would hazard a guess that Teen Titans Go was the main show keeping kids around. And even that was seeming to lose its effect as the years went on. Kids can now get their brain rot elsewhere, thank you very much. Tom Ashton saw this. It seemingly realized that making a channel that mainly tried to appeal to kids 6 to 11 wasn't going to cut it when those kids weren't watching. So, what if Cartoon Network still tried to appeal to those kids, but tried to target other demographics as well? That way, they wouldn't be keeping all their eggs in one basket. And with his prior work on Noggin and Freeform, Tom Ashton was the man to do just that. So it created two new programming blocks, Cartoon Nito to appeal to younger viewers, and Acme Night to appeal to older ones. We'll start with Cartoon Nito. It's just freaking Tickle You again. Though unlike Tickle You, which always seemed like an afterthought, they really did try to push Cartoon Nito, at least at first, with it airing 8 hours a day on weekdays at launch. Longer than Cartoon Network ran for, airing shows like Caillou and Cocomelon. Listen, I'm a grown man who pays grown man taxes, so I wasn't the biggest fan of Cartoon Network devoting such a large amount of their time slots to stuff like this. But even I have to say,
I think they did the best they could do. The block had nice bumpers and presentation. They even made original shows for the block like Batwheels and Bugs Bunny Builders. But, just like Tickle You, this block didn't seem to really do much to connect with general audiences. It's still around, but only after getting some major cutbacks, only airing for an hour every weekday. And honestly, I don't really see it sticking around much longer. If it's even still around at all by the time I finish editing this video. We also got Acme Night, a block designed for airing movies and miniseries that are aimed at a more family audience. You had your standard kids movie fares you would typically see on Cartoon Network, but you would also see stuff that's skewed a bit older. Stuff like DCEU films, the Ocean 11 movies, Crazy Rich Asians. Oh yeah, kids love Crazy Rich Asians. It was weird, but honestly it was kinda neat to see. I prefer it to the flicks, which just aired the same pretty so-so kids films most of the time, and it was fun seeing just how much they could get away with. Like, they aired 17 again.
It's called making love, isn't it? Maybe I'm old-fashioned, but I think that means that you do it with someone you love. And preferably when you're married!
And when movies ran short, they would air filler material. Oh, like what, a random episode of Teen Titans Go or Gumball or something? No, you were getting Wipeout and Family Matters, and you were gonna like it. They even aired some Adult Swim shows on here. Though I admit, while Acme Night was officially part of Cartoon Network, it was always sort of treated like its own thing, sort of like an in-between. So airing Adult Swim programming wasn't as crazy as it seemed. There were even some plans to have Acme Night original series, like Unicorn Warriors Eternal, which was set to be Genndy Tartakovsky's 5th show for the network and his grand return after Symbiotic Titan, and My Adventures with Superman, the first cartoon to focus on the Man of Steel as a solo act in years. I can't wait for these shows to air on Cartoon Network, because they're totally going to air on Cartoon Network. Both blocks did have their faults, but I have to give it to them. They had personality, which is something that most blocks on the channel have been missing for a long time. With so much time and resources going into these blocks, it did mean that Cartoon Network itself began to suffer a bit. A lot of shows from the Miller days were ending around this time, and there just weren't as many new shows to replace them. Not only that, but this was right around the time where AT&T launched HBO Max, dedicated to showing the best that Warner Brothers had to offer, and The Prince. Granted, plenty of Cartoon Network and Warner Bros. Shows had been made available on streaming services prior, mainly on Hulu. However, the idea of having a dedicated streaming service made by Warner Bros. Themselves, where all or at least a good number of those shows would be available all in one place, alongside new and original programming to boot, it sounded pretty enticing. However, with Warner Bros. And AT&T's focus on HBO Max, it did mean that Cartoon Network and Warner Bros. Animation were being stretched twice as thin. And keep in mind, this was all happening right around the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, which was already having an impact on production. Infinity Train and Summer Camp Island were moved over to the service, while many shows that would typically air on Cartoon Network ended up airing on Max first. Though Cartoon Network would often get to air these series later on, albeit usually only for a limited time, you had shows like Tig and Seek and the Fungies, which were actually Cartoon Network originals despite not premiering on the channel. There was Looney Tunes cartoons, created by Pete Browngarth of Secret Mountain Fort Awesome and Uncle Grandpa fame. This series attempted to be the most faithful adaptation of Looney Tunes since the original shorts, and I think it achieved that goal. The animation is extremely high quality for television standards, and I like how they occasionally experiment with using some more obscure Looney Tunes characters. However, I feel like due to the show trying so hard to capture the style of the original shorts, it kinda causes the series to not have much of its own identity, especially since, while these shorts are probably as close to the classic shorts as we've ever gotten, they're still not quite to the same quality. So there really isn't much reason to watch these shorts over the originals, unless you just wanted to see something different. They also made a lot of character changes that I'm personally not a fan of. I feel like they write Bugs to be a little too vulnerable, characters like Elmer and Porky are a bit too aggressive, and I found this version of Daffy to be really annoying. Virgin Zany Daffy, Chad Jerk Daffy. Elmer also wasn't allowed to use his guns for the first half of the show's run. This restriction was eventually lifted, but come on, man. I mean, the Looney Tunes show let characters use guns, and that show was a freaking sitcom. Looney Tunes cartoons isn't bad by any means, but it wasn't really my thing. Though I admit, I've never been the biggest Looney Tunes fan to begin with. Lots of people who are die-hard Looney Tunes fans absolutely love this interpretation. And if that's you, I would highly recommend giving the series a look. We also got Jellystones from Chowder creator C.H. Greenblatt, following a bunch of different Hanna-Barbera characters living in the town of Jellystone. This series is pretty good, containing a lot of the same humor as Chowder, though toned down just a bit. I like how there isn't one set main character. Episodes can kind of jump around between different characters' perspectives, which open things up to a lot more fun character interactions and story potential. Plus, it's just nice seeing these older, forgotten characters get another chance to shine. They make a lot of weird character changes though. Like, a lot of the cast got gender swapped, which I understand. These old Hanna-Barbera cartoons were pretty male-centric, but a lot of the characters' personalities are pretty different too, often in pretty arbitrary ways. Which feels odd when the series seems like it's trying to act as a love letter to these classic characters, but still, a good show despite that. But there were still several HBO Max original series that never aired on Cartoon Network, despite seeming like they should have. It was clear that Cartoon Network and Warner Brothers dividing up their resources between Cartoon Network, Cartoon Neato, Acme Night, and HBO Max was stretching both companies to their limits. The only new show Cartoon Network properly aired around this time was We Baby Bears. And even that wasn't even a show Tom Ash had greenlit, it was a holdover from the Christina Miller era. In a departure from the more slice-of-life stories of We Bear Bears, this prequel series follows the Bear brothers traveling to different worlds in a magical box in order to find a place to call home. The series isn't bad, but it's just kind of dull. And it feels like it was made just to capitalize on We Bear Bear's success in the Asian market, with this chibified art style. I'll give the series credit for being fairly creative when it comes to the designs of the different worlds they visit. Making a whole new location from scratch almost every episode couldn't have been easy. But I don't know, this fantastical plot just feels out of place with the We Bear Bears brand. Like, I know that show wasn't super realistic or anything, but what made that show enjoyable was its more down-to-earth stories and relatable characters. But when your premise is this fantastical, a lot of that relatable charm goes away, and the new characters added here just aren't as interesting as the original series cast was. Meh! We also got the release of Lamput, an international series coming from India. A mostly silent cartoon about an orange blob named Lamput trying to escape capture from these two scientists, feeling like a sort of throwback to older cartoons like Pink Panther. But those were the only new original non-HBO Max or Cartoon Neato series we got around this time. Cartoon Network's schedule did start seeing some variety to make up for it though, as the channel began to air older series, seemingly just as a way to have something to air, given how many shows from the Miller era were either ending or coming to an end. They even started to dial back on the Teen Titans Go, with Gumball replacing it as Cartoon Network's #1 show, despite the fact that Gumball had already ended at this point, per creators' wishes. Still, it was clear that the AT&T buyout, the launch of HBO Max, and the COVID-19 pandemic had thrown Cartoon Network for a bit of a loop. However, while Tom Ashton's venture as Cartoon Network president might have had a bit of a rocky start, with COVID beginning to ramp down and the studio's adjustment to HBO Max's presence, things would soon begin to change for the better. What? Hello? Yes? Okay. Okay. We're boned. So it turned out that the AT&T didn't actually know how to run an entertainment studio. Whoops. They put themselves into massive debt just buying Warner Brothers and leaned hard into HBO Max at launch, hoping for it to become a massive hit. From spending crazy money on exclusive series and original straight to HBO Max films, to releasing movies on HBO Max day and day with their theatrical release throughout 2021, the company just wasn't making back what they were putting in. So AT&T decided to sell Warner Brothers to Discovery in exchange for Discovery to take on all of Warner Brothers' debt. Tom Ashton was out as Cartoon Network president after only about 2 years, which is a shame because it didn't really feel like he had the time to make the channel his own. And as such, judging his tenure is a bit tricky. I wasn't a fan of Cartoon Neato, but Acme Night was kinda cool. I appreciate him bringing back some of the older classic series, and increasing the overall variety on the channel. But there was also word he was planning on bringing live-action sitcoms to the network, an attempt to appeal to the tween girl demographic. Tom Ashton's time at Cartoon Network was pretty hit or miss, but it was at the very least interesting. Honestly, it reminds me of the Stu Snyder era in a way, with its high highs and low lows, but who knows what he would have been able to accomplish if given more time. Tom Ashton was replaced with none other than Michael O'Lean, the interim president who preceded him, and with Warner Brothers now being owned by Discovery, he was taking over at a very difficult time. You see, David Zaslav, the president of the newly named Warner Brothers Discovery, was tasked with finding ways to cut costs in order to reduce the massive debt that Warner Brothers was in. And some of his ideas weren't all too bad, like deciding to give some movies that were originally intended to release straight to HBO Max a theatrical run in order to make up more of the cost, or being more willing to share exclusivity deals with certain Warner Brothers-owned series to other competing services, as a way to make a little extra pocket change. Heck, I even understand the controversial change to rename HBO Max to Max, as a way to help get rid of confusion for casual viewers who thought HBO Max was a service just for HBO stuff. But some of his other tactics were a lot more extreme, like the removal of tons of shows and movies from HBO Max as part of a way to reduce residuals and licensing fees, or the straight up cancelling or writing off of projects before they even have a chance to see the light of day. And Cartoon Network was hit particularly hard by this, because as it turns out, kids are not only not watching watching cable, but they're not watching HBO Max either. Heck, I'm not even sure if they're watching animation in general anymore. HBO Max used to have tons of Cartoon Network and Warner Brothers series back in 2020 and early 2021, but now, looking at Max, it practically feels like a ghost town. And even that is nothing compared to what happened next.
Stop, he's already dead!
In 2021, it was announced that Cartoon Network Studios would be merging with Warner Brothers Animation, becoming a subsidiary for the first time since the Hanna-Barbera days. I mean, from a business perspective, it makes sense. Warner Brothers and Cartoon Network both fulfill very similar functions, so why not save some money by combining them? They can work under the same roof, share resources, and possibly provide more synergy between products. But seeing the Cartoon Network Studios building be shut down just a couple of months after the HBO Max purchase and just a few months before Cartoon Network's big 30th anniversary event, people were starting to get a bit worried. And the general lack of content on the main channel definitely wasn't helping either. It had gotten so bad that Cartoon Network even trended on Twitter due to people confusing Cartoon Network Studios shutting down for the actual channel shutting down. It got so bad that Cartoon Network's official Twitter had to make a statement about it. Tensions were high, and people were concerned that the higher-ups of Warner Brothers might just do away with Cartoon Network altogether, and all eyes were on the newly instilled Michael O'Lean to give us some reassurance that everything was going to be okay. Well, that didn't help things. Cartoon Network had a pretty good 30th anniversary despite the circumstances, airing older programming in the later hours of Cartoon Network all month long, ending with another marathon of birthday-themed episodes on the day itself. Overall, not bad. Not as good as the 20th anniversary, but hey, with the situation with the network so hectic at the time, I'll take what we can get. But these reruns of older shows during the later hours of the evening did surprisingly well in the ratings. So well that Cartoon Network decided to create a new programming block, titled Checkered Past, dedicated to airing older Cartoon Network programming between 5 PM and 7 PM every weeknight, featuring these cool bumpers reminiscent of the CN City era, while still being their own thing. This block was honestly pretty cool. It was just what Cartoon Network needed to get out of these troubling times. Psych! Yeah, so Checkered Past didn't actually air on Cartoon Network. It aired on Adult Swim, with Adult Swim moving 3 hours earlier, now starting at 5 PM, albeit airing Cartoon Network content, but still. Acme Night was also moved over to Adult Swim as well, and those Acme Night originals like Unicorn and Superman, they were moving too! Cartoon Network had been struggling to attract a younger audience for years now, with Michael O'Lean even saying in an interview that the average age of Cartoon Network's audience was 29 years old. So it seems like they just decided to give up. If kids were too busy watching their skibbity toilets, then screw it. Let's try appealing more to the adults who are actually watching. Though it's not to say that Cartoon Network had been completely abandoned. Like with every other president change, we got a new rebrand, with the network entering the pastel era, featuring these mashed up bumpers with characters from multiple shows. I like how they include clips from older shows, which works since Cartoon Network had gotten a lot more used to airing older programs. Though I admit the presentation does feel a bit sterile. I'm not really a fan of the pink and green they use behind the Cartoon Network logo. I don't know, it just looks kind of tacky. But we're finally getting some new shows at least. Tiny Toon University aired on the network after it premiered on Max first, but still. The Heroic Adventures of the Valiant Prince Ivandoe, a show from Cartoon Network's European division, finally aired in late 2023, after airing in the UK a year prior.
And we got Jessica's Big Little World,
a spin-off to Craig of the Creek that became the first Cartoon Network original series to air on Cartoonito and Cartoon Network concurrently. However, now these shows are seeming to set the world on fire.
Heck, Jessica's Big Little World is already wrap production.
And that's basically where we are as of the writing of this video. What's ahead for Cartoon Network in the future? Well, there's no way of really knowing. There have been a few things announced, though who knows how many of these shows will actually air on the network, as opposed to being moved over to Max or Adult Swim, or just end up being written off for taxes before they're even released. So yeah, Cartoon Network is not really in the greatest of places right now, which I know is a kind of bummer way to end this video, but hey, don't blame me, it's not my fault. But if going over the channel's entire history has shown me anything, it's that Cartoon Network has gone through rough patches before. The channel's history has always been full of peaks and valleys, and sometimes all it takes is that one show to come around and change everything. But cable is dying, and has been for a while now. Kids just aren't watching cable as much as they used to, and at this point, I don't think there's much Cartoon Network could do to bring them back. I think the media landscape has just changed too much. But even if the channel's relevance isn't what it used to be, I still like to imagine that there's some kids out there who are still watching, and are just as big of Cartoon Network fans as we all are. But nothing lasts forever. While the Cartoon Network brand will probably stick around as a valuable IP until the end of time, one day, the channel itself will most likely go under, which is why I think it's important to appreciate what we have while we have it. After looking back on what Cartoon Network has had to offer for the past 30 plus years of its existence, I think I figured out why this channel feels so special compared to its competition. It's the spirit. Cartoon Network always felt the most experimental out of all the other channels. They took the most risk, and sometimes those risks didn't always work out for the best. But at least when Cartoon Network had a big flop, it was usually at least interesting. It feels like Cartoon Network will give anything a shot, be it from their originals, licensed shows from Hanna-Barbera and Warner Brothers, to international shows from Japan, France, Canada, or the UK. There was so much variety. Like, it's amazing to me that all these shows have technically aired on the same channel. That's crazy. Cartoon Network also felt the most adult out of the big three children's networks. Not to say they didn't have shows that are more geared towards kids. They have, that's not a bad thing. But a lot of Cartoon Network shows felt more adult skewed, be it through raunchier humor or darker and more mature themes. It never felt like the shows on Cartoon Network were talking down to their audience. Cartoon Network also had the best presentation compared to its competition. Some of these bumpers and blocks had so much heart and soul poured into them, and in some cases are just as, if not more fondly remembered than the shows they were meant to advertise. They helped add a sense of cohesion to the channel. It did so much to help elevate the overall viewing experience. Granted, the presentation has gone down a bit as time has gone on, but that's true of all cable channels. But each era of Cartoon Network, even some of the weaker ones, all have something about them that gives them a unique identity. That's something I really appreciate. Cartoon Network also feels like it has the most respect for its past compared to the other channels. Not to say that they're perfect, but it wasn't uncommon for Cartoon Network to air some older shows for a special event or a special block, or sometimes just because they felt like it. But it never got to the point where it felt like pandering. It always felt like it was done because, hey, these shows are awesome. Why shouldn't we air them? All these factors are the reason why Cartoon Network has been, for me at least, the best place for cartoons for well over 3 decades. Cartoon Network has been a part of my life for almost as long as I can remember. It's been a constant factor and played a huge role in inspiring the love of animation that I have today. That's what Cartoon Network means to me. I hope you've enjoyed this little trip down memory lane. And if you made it this far, thank you. It really means the world to me. What do you think of Cartoon Network? What shows or eras of the channel's history are your favorite or least favorites? And were there any notable shows that I missed? Leave your thoughts in the comments down below. I genuinely want to hear what you all think. If you like this video, feel free to like it, subscribe, and consider checking out my Patreon if you want to see more videos like it. And as always, have a great day. Oh crap, I forgot to talk about the Mr. Men show. Fuck!